I would like to welcome all of you to this public meeting, the COVID-19 pandemic in India and the need for a socialist strategy. My name is Saman Gunadasa. I am a member of the political committee of the Socialist Equality Party Sri Lanka, and I will be chairing this evening's meeting. The pandemic is rooted in biology. However, it is not primarily a medical or health disaster. Rather, it is a social catastrophe and social crime. It is a man-made tragedy, or more precisely, one of the greatest political crimes of global capitalism in the 21st century. The Narendra Modi government, like capitalist governments around the world, knowingly allowed pandemic to spread by keeping the economy open so that corporate profits could grow and India's billionaires could double their wealth. But here, the Modi is not alone. In the United States, over 600,000 people have died due to the so-called profits before lives strategy of both the Trump and Biden administrations. We take British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who has presided over 150,000 coronavirus deaths in a country of just 65 million people. Last autumn, as cases were surging again, he told his advisors, I quote, "No more lockdowns, let the bodies pile high in their thousands," end quote. Today, as a result of these criminal policies, almost 170 million infections that have been recorded around the world. Take the official death toll has surpassed 3.5 million. It is just official. But the true number of fatalities is estimated to be as high as 10 million. You take on any given day, 600,000 people test positive this moment of time, and more than 12,000 die. For workers' opposition to the ruling elite's policies of mass infections and death is growing around the world. This includes India, where just this week, hundreds of thousands of ASHA, the rural health workers, held one-day countrywide strike. This is the second strike of these ASHA workers to demand personal protective gear, or popularly known as PPE, to protect them from the virus, and also demanding a living wage. Not only that, on Monday, auto workers walked off their jobs at the Hyundai plant in Tamil Nadu state to demand again better protection against COVID-19. It forced to this auto giant to temporarily shut the facility. So these struggles must be unified with those of workers around the world and animated with by socialist perspective, so that working class can remove control of the response to the pandemic from the capitalist ruling elites and implement a science-based strategy that prioritizes saving lives over capitalist profit. So today, we have speakers from the Socialist Equality parties in Sri Lanka, the United States, France, and Canada. They will elaborate this strategy in their speeches delivered in 3 languages: English, Tamil, and Sinhalese. So I would like to urge all the participants, if you have any questions or clarifications, please post them. You have a chat column here. By now you may be already familiarized. You go to the chat column and then you can post your questions or comments or clarifications, whatever you need. But if you expect an answer from us, please accompany your message with some kind of a communication method, either email address or a telephone number, so that we will respond to you soon. We may not be able to get these questions today, but we will respond to you soon. With that, I would like to go to the first speaker, Comrade Deepal Jayasekara, Assistant Secretary of Socialist Equality Party, Sri Lanka, and a prominent writer for the World Socialist website on developments, especially in India. He will address the meeting from Colombo in Sinhala, and we will provide subtitles in English and Tamil. Please welcome Comrade Jayasekara. Jayasekara, you must unmute yourself, I think.
Jayasekara, you have to unmute.
Sorry. I forgot that. Okay.
Right. Now okay.
සහෝදරවරුනි, COVID-19 වසංගතය කෝටි සංඛ්‍යාත ජනයාට විනාශය ගෙන දෙමින් සුනාමියක් මෙන් ඉන්දියාව පුරා වේගයෙන් පැතිරෙනවා. අම්පරු පන්තිය සහ පීඩිත ජනතාව මෙම භයංකර අර්බුදයේ ධර්මම බලපෑමට මුහුණ දී සිටිනවා. නිල සංඛ්‍යාලේඛන වලට අනුව ඉන්දියාවේ සමස්ත කොරෝනා වෛරස් ආසාදිතයන් සංඛ්‍යාව දැන් මිලියන 27ක් වගේ. මරණ 3,20,000 පන්නන. ඉන්දියාව තුල වසංගතයේ දෙවන රැල්ලේ භයංකරත්වය අවධාරණය කරමින් මේ ආසාදිතයන් සංඛ්‍යාවෙන් මිලියන 15කට වඩා වාර්තා වෙලා තියෙන්නේ පහුගිය සති 8ක කාලය තුල. පිළිවෙලින් ලක්ෂ 4කට අධික හා 3000කට අධික වන ලෙස අනි රටක් තුල ලෝකයේ ඉහළම දෛනික ආසාදිතයන් හා මරණ සංඛ්‍යා යලි යලිත් වාර්තා කිරීමෙන් අනතුරුව ඉන්දියාව දැන් ලක්ෂ 2කට වැඩි COVID-19 ආසාදිතයන් සංඛ්‍යාවන්ද 3000කට වැඩි මරණ සංඛ්‍යාවන්ද දිනපතා වාර්තා කරමින් ඉන්නවා. අගමැති නරේන්ද්‍ර මෝදීගේ සහ ඔහුගේ ಭಾರತೀಯ ජනතා පක්ෂයේ ආණ්ඩුව වසංගතය පහළ දැකීමේ ප්‍රවණතාවක පවතින බවට ආරම්භාන්න මෙම සාපේක්ෂව අඩු දෛනික ආසාදිතයන් හා මරණ සංඛ්‍යාවන් ගසා කනවා. ඔවුන්ගේ ඒ ප්‍රයත්නයන් තිබියදීම ඒවාට ප්‍රතිකූලව යථාර්ථය වෙලා තියෙන්නේ වසංගතය අඛණ්ඩව වර්ධනය වෙනවායි කියන කාරණාව. වාර්තාගත ආසාදිතයන් සංඛ්‍යාවන් මෑතදී පහළ යාමට බලපාපු එක හේතුවක් තමයි COVID-19 දැන් ඉන්දියාවේ අතිමහත් ග්‍රාමීය ජනගහනය පුරා පාලනයකින් තොරව වේගයෙන් පැතිර යනවා කියන එක. මේ ග්‍රාමීය ප්‍රදේශවල COVID-19 සඳහා පරීක්ෂණ ඒ වගේම සෞඛ්‍ය අධිකෘත පහසුකම් නැති තරම්. නිල සංඛ්‍යාලේඛන ඒවායේ ඉහළම අගයන් වල පවතින කොට පවා ඒ සංඛ්‍යාලේඛන මේ ව්‍යසනයේ සැබෑ තත්ත්වය අතිමහත් ලෙස අවතක්සේරු කිරීමක් වුණා. වසංගතයේ පුරාම COVID-19 පරීක්ෂණ පවත්වාගෙන ගොන ඇස්සේ ආන්තිකව අඩු මට්ටමකයි. COVID-19 පැන නගින්න කලින් පවා ඉන්දියාවේ මරණ වලින් වෛද්‍ය විද්‍යාත්මකව සහතික කෙරුණේ 4න් එකක් විතරයි. බොහෝ වෛද්‍ය විශේෂඥයන් අනුතුරු අඟවලා තියෙන්නේ හැබැයි මරණ සංඛ්‍යාව මේ නිල අගයමින් 5 ගුණේ ඉඳලා 10 ගුණේ දක්වා ගයක් වෙනවායි කියලා. මොකද්ද මේකෙන් අදහස් කරන්නේ? අප්‍රේල් මැද ඉඳලා මේ දක්වා හැම දිනකම දිනකට 20000 ඉඳලා 40000 දක්වා දැවන්ත සංඛ්‍යාවක් COVID-19 වසංගතයෙන් මරණයටපත් වෙලා තියෙනවා කියන කාරණා. වසංගතයේ ජීව විද්‍යාත්මක ප්‍රපංචයක් වුණත් අකණ්ඩව වැඩෙන දැවන්ත සෞඛ්‍ය හා මේ සමාජ ව්‍යවස්ථයට තුඩු දීලා තියෙන ප්‍රධාන හේතු දේශපාලනිකයි. ගෝලීය වසංගතයක තර්ජනය පෙර දකින්න පුළුවන් දෙයක් වුණා. ඒ වගේම පෙර දැක්කා. ඒ වුණාට ධනපති ලාභ කරන පද්ධතිය ඒ වගේ පෙර දකින්න පුළුවන් සිද්ධියක් ව්‍යසනයක් සඳහා සූදානම් වෙන්න ඒ වගේ මේ පැන නගුණා මේ පාලනය කරන්න අවශ්‍ය පියවර ගන්න පවතින තමන්ගේ සම්පූර්ණ නොකියාව සනාථ කරලා තියෙනවා. උතුරු ඇමරිකාවේ හා යුරෝපයේ අධිරාජ්‍යවාදී මධ්‍යස්ථාන වල ඉඳලා ඉන්දියාවේ සහ පාකිස්තානයේ දක්ෂිණාංශික ධනපති තන්ත්‍රයන් දක්වා මේ සෑම රටකම ආණ්ඩු දශක ගණනාවක් තිස්සේ සෞඛ්‍ය විද්‍යාවට කපාදු කරලා ඒ රටවල සෞඛ්‍ය සේවාවන් පරිහානියට අතහැරලා තියෙනවා. දැන් ඒ සෞඛ්‍ය සේවාවන් මේ වගේ දැවන්තව ඉහළ නගින රෝගීන් සංඛ්‍යාවට අවශ්‍ය පහසුකම් සලක්වන්න අපොහසත් වෙලා තියෙන්නේ අන්න ඒ නිසා. ඉන් පස්සේ ඇත්තටම වෛරසය පැතිරීම ආරම්භ වුණාම ඔවුන් මනුෂ්‍ය ජීවිත රැකගැනීමට ඉහළින් සංගතවල ලාභ ආරක්ෂා කිරීමට ප්‍රමුඛතාව දුන්නා. ව්‍යාපාර විවෘත කරන්න අවසර දුන්නා. සම්පූර්ණට මූල්‍ය හා සමාජ සහයෝගය ලබා දීම ප්‍රතික්ෂේප කරා. ඒ වගේම මිලියන ගණන් ජනයා මරණයටපත් වෙන ඉඩ ඇරියා. ඒ මක්නිසාද කියතොත් එක්සත් ජනපදයේ ජනාධිපති ඩොනාල්ඩ් ට්‍රම්ප්ගේ ඒ වගේම නිව්යෝර්ක් ටයිම්ස් පත්‍රයේ ප්‍රකාශ වලට අනුව ගත්තොත් උන් කියන්නේ ප්‍රතිකාරය රෝගයට වඩා දරුණු වෙන්න බෑ කියලා. මනුෂ්‍ය ජීවිත සම්බන්ධයෙන් මේ ගෝලීය ධනපති ප්‍රභූව දක්වන මෙම සමා විරහිත නොතැකීම එහි තියුණුම ප්‍රකාශනය අත්පත් කරගන්නේ ඉන්දියාව තුළ දැන් සිදු වෙන දැවන්ත මරණ සංඛ්‍යාව. එරට කඩාවැටලා තියෙන සෞඛ්‍ය සේවය මේ වසංගතය මගින් මුළුමනින්ම යටකෙරුම් තත්ත්වයටපත් වෙනවා. ඔක්සිජන්, දැඩි සත්කාර සේවා ඇඳන්, ICU බෙඩ්, ඒ වගේම ශ්වසනාධාරක, වෙන්ටිලේෂන් වැනි මූල්‍ය වෛද්‍ය පහසුකම් වල පවතින දැවන්ත අඩුපාඩු නිසා COVID-19 රෝගීන් මහමග මැරී වැටෙනවා. ඔවුන්ගේ නිවාසවල මැරී වැටෙනවා. සමහර විට එක වන්දේ දෙන්න ගානේ ලෙඩු දානවා ආකාරයට මේ රෝගීන්ගෙන් පිරීලා තිබෙනවා. ඒ නිසා වෛරසෙන් දරුණු ලෙස රෝගී වීලා ඉඳලා තියෙන දහස් ගණන් ජනයාට රෝහල් වලට ඇතුල් වෙන්න පවා නොහැකිව ලත් වෙනවා. මලකඳන් මහ පරිමාණයෙන් ගංගා වලට විසි කරනවා. නැත්නම් කිසිදු කලකුණක් නැතුව ඔහේ වලලා දානවා. මේ වැඩෙන COVID-19 ආසාදනයන් සහ ඒ වගේම දෙවන රැල්ලක පවතින අන්තරාය ගැන පෙබරවාරි තරම් ඈතදී මෝදි ආණ්ඩුවට අනතුරු ඇඳුණා. ඒ වුණත් ඒ සම්බන්ධයෙන් කිසිම දෙයක් නොකර ඉන්න උන් තීරණය කළා. මෝදිගේ BJP ඒ වගේම විපක්ෂයේ අනුකුත් පක්ෂ සමග එක්කව වෙලා මාර්තු මාසයේ පුරා ඒ වගේම අප්‍රේල් මාසයේ වැඩි කාලයක ප්‍රාන්ත මැතිවරණ වෙනුවෙන් දැවන්ත රැස්වීම් කරා. ඒ වගේම ආණ්ඩුව කුම්භ මේලා වගේ දැවන්ත ආගමික උත්සව වලට සහ මහජනීය ලක්ෂ ගාණින් සහභාගී වෙනත් අවස්ථාවන් වලට උත්සව වලට අවසර දුන්නා. නිල දෛනික මරණ සංඛ්‍යාව 3000 ඉක්මවන තත්ත්වයකදී පවා මෝදි රෝගය පාලනය කරන්න ජාතික පරිමාණ අගුළු දැමීමක් ක්‍රියාවට දාන්න එක මුරණ්ඩු ආකාරයෙන් ප්‍රතික්ෂේප කරා. ඒ අප්‍රේල් 20 වෙනිදා ජාතිය අමතා ඔහු කළ කතාවේදී ඔහු කිව්වා ඔහුගේ ආණ්ඩුවේ එල්ලය ඉන්දියානු ජනතාව වසංගතයේ ගලවා ගැනීම නෙවෙයි රට අගුළු දැමීමෙන් ගලවා ගැනීමක් කියලා. මෝදි ආණ්ඩුව ඉන්දියාවේ මේ පාලක පන්තිය මනුෂ්‍ය ජීවිත සම්බන්ධයෙන් දක්වන මේ නොතකීම සහ ඔවුන්ගේ අධික ලාභ තෘෂ්ණාව තව දුරටත් අතිශය අශ්ලීල ලෙස ප්‍රදර්ශනය කළමින් ඔහුගේ ආණ්ඩුව COVID-19 එන්නත සියල්ලන්ටම නොමිලේ ලබා දීම සම්බන්ධයෙන් සහතික වීම ප්‍රතික්ෂේප කරනවා. ඔවුන් එහෙම කරන්නේ එහෙම හැමෝටම එන්නත නොමිලේ ලබා දෙන්න ආණ්ඩුවට යන වියදම උදේ ඩොලර් බිලියන 6.4ක්. ඒ කියන්නේ ඉන්දියාවේ දළදේශීය නිෂ්පාදනයෙන් 0.3.2 වෙන තත්ත්වයක්. එහි ප්‍රතිඵලයක් ලෙස එක එන්නත් මාත්‍රාවකට යන වියදම කම්පරුවන්ට ඔවුන්ගේ දවසක හෝ දවස් කිහිපයක වැටුපට සමාන වන තත්ත්වයක් යටතේ කෝටි සංඛ්‍යාත දුක ඉන්දියානුවන්ට කිසිදාක එන්නත ලබා ගන්න නොහැකි වෙන්න ඉඩ තියෙනවා. දැන් ඔය විවිධ ප්‍රාන්තාණ්ඩු විසින් ක්‍රියාවට දාලා තියෙන අගුළු දෙමින් යටතේ ඇත්තටම සෑම කර්මාන්තයක්ම පාහේ අත්‍යවශ්‍ය සේවා කියලා සැලකනවා. ඒ නිසා ඒවලදී අකුළු දෙමින් තිබෙදීම කම්පරුවන්ට අනාරක්ෂිත කොන්දේසි යටතේ වැඩ කරන්න බල කිරලා තියෙනවා. ඒ නිසා තමන්ගේ හිතේසිසියන්ගේ ජීවිත අවදානමේ හෙලන්න බල කිරලා තියෙනවා. මේ තත්ත්වය නිසා පහුගිය සති කීපය තුල මෑත සති කීපය තුල රට පුරා කම්පරුව දුසින් ගණනාවක් මරණයටපත් වුණා. ඒ පිළිබඳ සැබෑ තොරතුරු ඇත්තටම සංගතවල සහ ආණ්ඩුවේ කුමන්ත්‍රණකාරී නියතතාව මතින් යට ගහලා තියෙනවා. චෙන්නයි නගරයට ආසන්නව පිහිටලා තියෙන ශ්‍රී පෙරම්පුදූර් වරකඩම් කර්මාන්ත කලාපයේ පිහිටි හුන්ඩායි මෝටර්ස් කම්මලේ අඩු ගානේ කම්පරුව 10ක්. ඒ වගේම ඒ කලාපයේම පිහිටි රෙනෝල්ට් නිසාන් මෝටර කම්මලේ කම්පරුව 5ක් මිය ගියා මේ කියපු මරණ සංඛ්‍යාවට ඇතුළත් වෙනවා. ඒ වගේම ඉන්දියාවේ තියෙන අනිත් ප්‍රධාන මෝටර රථ නිෂ්පාදන මධ්‍යස්ථානයක් වන උතුරේ හරියානා ප්‍රාන්තයේ ගුරුගෝන් මනේසර් කර්මාන්ත කලාපයේ මේ ආකාරයේ මරණ රැල්ලක් වාර්තා වෙනවා. ඒ කලාපය ගත්තොත් අඩු ගානේ ගුරුගෝන් වල පිහිටලා තියෙන මාරුති සුසුකි මෝටර රථ 11 කම්හලේ කම්පරුව 5ක්, හොන්ඩා කම්හලේ කම්පරුව 2, ටාටා මෝටර්ස් කම්හලේ 1 කම්පරුවෙක් මේ ආකාරයට මරණයටපත් වෙලා තියෙනවා. මේ මරණ වගේම ඉන්දියාව පුරා තවත් ලක්ෂ සංඛ්‍යාත මරණක් වසංගතය තුල එය පැන නැගීමට කලින් මෝදි ආණ්ඩුව සහ සමස්ත ඉන්දියානු පාලක ප්‍රභූවම ගෙන ගිය පිළිවෙත්වල ඍජු ප්‍රතිඵලයක්. දශක ගණනාවක් තිස්සේ කොංග්‍රස් පක්ෂයේද BSP සමාජවාදී පක්ෂය සහ තමිල්නාඩුවේ DMK හා AIDMK වැනි ප්‍රාදේශීය හා කුලවාදී ධනේශ්වර පක්ෂද මාක්ස්වාදී ඉන්දියානු කොමියුනිස්ට් පක්ෂය නැත්නම් CPM හා ඉන්දියානු කොමියුනිස්ට් පක්ෂය CPI යන ස්ටැලින්වාදී පාර්ලිමේන්තු පක්ෂද විසින් නායකත්වය දෙන ලද ආණ්ඩුද ඇතුළත් මධ්‍යම හා ප්‍රාන්ත ආණ්ඩු සෞඛ්‍ය සේවයට කරන රාජ්‍ය වියදම දළ දේශීය නිෂ්පාදිතයෙන් 1.5ක සාගිනි මට්ටමක තමයි පවත්වාගෙන ගිහිල්ලා තියෙන්නේ. එමගින් අද රෝහල් සහ සායන COVID-19 සඳහා මුළුමනින්ම නුසූදානම් තත්ත්වයකට ඇද දාලා තියෙනවා. වසංගතයේ මුලින්ම 2020 ජනවාරියේ පැන නැගියකොට මෝදි ආණ්ඩුව මාස 3කට අධික කාලයක් තිස්සේ ඒ එළබෙන අන්තරාය බොහෝම සැහැල්ලුවෙන් නොතක තමයි වැඩ කළේ. අස්තේ ජනතාවගේ ජීවිත සම්බන්ධයෙන් වුන් දක්වන ඒ සමා විරහිත අන්තිපාදක නොතකීමෙන් ඇතිවෙන්න පුළුවන් ප්‍රතිවිපාක ගැන භීතියටපත් වෙලා මෝදි හදිසියෙම අංශක 180කින් හැරීමක් අරගෙන කිසිම සැලසුමකින් හෝ අනුතුරුකකින් තොරව 2020 මාර්තු 26 වෙනිදා විශේෂකාරී ජාතික පරිමාණව අගුළු දැමීම නිවේදනය කළා. මෝදිගේ මේ කිසිදු සූදානමකින් තොර අගුළු දැමීම ඒ නිසා එක රැයකින් රැකියා විරහිතපත් වෙච්ච රැකියා විරහිතයන් බාරපත් කෝටි සංඛ්‍යාත කම්පරුවන්ට ලබා දුන්නේ අන්තිම සොච්චන් සාගිනි මට්ටමේ සහනයක් විතරයි. මෙම කාරණාව ඒ වගේම ක්‍රමානුකූල උළුල් පරිමාණ COVID-19 පරීක්ෂණ හා සබඳතා හබායම් සිදු කරන්න ආණ්ඩුව අපොහොසත් වීම ඒ වගේම කඩා වැටිලා තියෙන සෞඛ්‍ය සේවාවන්ට දැවන්ත පරිමාණයෙන් සම්පත් සම්ප්‍රේෂණය කර කිරීම දැඩි ලෙස ප්‍රතික්ෂේප කිරීම මේ සියල්ල එකට අරගෙන ගත්තහම මෝදීගේ අගුළු දැමීම මුළුමනින්ම අසාර්ථක වුණේ මොකද කියන එක අවබෝධ කරගන්න එක ඒ හැටි අමාරුවක් නෑ. මේ BJP ආණ්ඩුව ක්‍රියාවට දාපු අගුළු දැමීමේ ව්‍යසනකාරී බලපෑම වඩාත් විසඳාකාරයෙන් පෙන්වුම් කෙරුණේ සංක්‍රමණික කම්පරුවන්ගේ ඉරණමකි. ප්‍රධාන නගරවල ඉඳලා දුර ඈත පිහිටපු ඔවුන්ගේ ගම්මාන කරා ඒ මිලියන සංඛ්‍යාත සංක්‍රමික කම්පරුවන්ට ආගමනින් ආපු යන්න බල කෙරුණා. අගුළු දැමීම හේතු කොටගෙන අතේ සතේ නැති තත්වයට ඒ වගේම බොහෝ සෙයින් උන්හිටි දැන් අනුමු තත්ත්වයටපත් වුණු මේ කම්පරුවන්ට පිටපතලා තමන්ගේ උපන් ගම් වලට යන්න බල කෙරුණා. ඒ ගමනේදී ඔවුන් බොහෝ අවස්ථාවන්හිදී හිතාමතලා නොවුනම COVID-19 වෛරසය තමන්ගේ ගම් වලට අරගෙන ගියා. සංගත හා මූල ප්‍රභූවේ නියමයන් අනුව යමින් මෝදි ආණ්ඩුව පහුගිය අවුරුද්දේ අප්‍රේල් මාසේ අග ඉඳලා ආර්ථිකය යලි විවෘත කිරීම ආරම්භ කළා. ඒ වගේම COVID-19 නිසා පැනවූ සීමාවන් ඊළඟ 6 මාසය තිස්සේ ලිහිල් කිරීම සමග එක පෙළට ආසාදනයන් හා මරණ සංඛ්‍යාවන් වර්ධනය වුණා. ඒ යලි විවෘත කිරීමේ පිළිවෙතේ මෝදි ආණ්ඩුව දිගටම එළඹීගෙන හිටියා. ඒක වෙනස් කරන්න වැඩ කරේ නැහැ. මෙහිදී මේ Hindu අධිපති BJP ආණ්ඩුවට ඊනියා විරුද්ධ පක්ෂ විසින් මෙහෙයවනු ලබන ප්‍රාන්ත ආණ්ඩු ඇතුළු රට පුරා සියලු ප්‍රාන්ත ආණ්ඩුවල ක්‍රියාකාරී සහයෝගය ලැබුණා. මෙන්න මේ සමූහ ප්‍රතිසංස්කරක පිළිවෙත herd immunity policy එක තමයි වත්මන් මේ ව්‍යසනකාරී COVID-19 ආසාදන හා මරණ රැල්ල සඳහා මාවත පෑදුවේ. ඒ සමූහ ප්‍රතිසංස්කරණ පිළිවෙත වඩා විවෘතවම සාරාංශගත කරමින් මෝදිගේ එක වෛද්‍ය උපදේශකයේ 2020 මැයි මාසයේදී කියා සිටියා ඉන්දියානුව මිලියන 2ක් පමණ මිය යන්න පුළුවන්. ඒ වුණාට ආර්ථිකයේ පුනර්ජීවනය කිරීම වෙනුවෙන් එය ගෙවන්න සිදුවන ගණන් ගන්න තරම් දෙයක් නොවන වියදමක් කියන ආකාරයට. මේ සෞඛ්‍ය විශේෂණයේ සමග ඉන්දියාවේ ධනපති ප්‍රභූව සහ මධ්‍යම සහ ප්‍රාන්ත ආණ්ඩුවල ඉන්න මේ දේශපාලන හෙංචයියන් ඉන්දියාවේ කම්පරුවන් සහ සෙසු වැඩ කරන ජනතාව සඳහා ඊට නොඅඩු ආකාරයේ තවත් දෙවන වසංගතයක් නිර්මාණය කරලා තියෙනවා. ඒ රැකියා විනාශයේ දරිද්‍රතාවය සහ සාංගීර්ණයේ වසංගතය. අසීන් ප්‍රේම්ජී විශ්වවිද්‍යාලය විසින් පිළියෙල කරලා තියෙන 2021 වසරේ වැඩ කරන ඉන්දියාවේ තත්ත්වය COVID-19 වසරක් කියන මාතෘකානියුත වාර්තාවකට අනුව පහුගිය අවුරුද්ද ඇතුළත තවත් ඉන්දියානුවන් මිලියන 230ක් දවසකට ඉන්දියානු රුපියල් 375 නැත්නම් එක්සත් ජනපද ඩොලර් 5ක් ලෙස ගණන් ගැනෙන යකුන් මට්ටමේ දරිද්‍රතා රේඛාවෙන් පහළට තල්ලු කරලා තියෙනවා. ඒ කාලය ඇතුළතම ඉන්දියාවේ බිලියනපතියෝ තමන්ගේ ධනය එක්සත් ජනපද ඩොලර් බිලියන 596 දක්වා දෙගුණයකට ආසන්න ප්‍රමාණයකින් වැඩි කරගෙන තියෙනවා. ඒ ආණ්ඩුවේ ආර්ථිකය විවෘත කිරීමේ මිනිමරු පිළිවෙතට සහ මූල්‍ය වෙළඳපොළවල් හා ආයෝජකයන්ගේ ධනය නගා සිටුවීම පිණිස ලෝපුරා ආණ්ඩුව මහ බැංකු ඩොලර් ට්‍රිලියන ගණන් පොම්ප කරමින් ගෙන ගිය වැඩපිළිවෙලට ස්තුති වෙන්න පන්තන. ඉන්දියාවේ කම්පරු පන්තිය සහ පීඩිත ජනතාව ලෝපුරා ඔවුන්ගේ පන්ති සහෝදර සහෝදරියන් මෙන්ම පාලක ප්‍රභූව ගෙන යන මෙම සමාජ ඝාතනය සහ ඔවුන්ගේ රැකියා වැටුප්පා සේවා හා ජීවන කොන්දේසි මත එල්ල කරන පාලකතුන්ගේ ප්‍රහාර නිහඬව පිළිගන්න එකක් නෑ. පහුගිය මාස 18ක කාලයක් තිස්සේ ඉදක්කා ඉන්දියානු කම්පරුවන් අනේක වර්ජන හා විරෝධතාවල නිරත වෙලා. පහුගිය අවුරුද්දේ ජනවාරි 8 වෙනිදා සහ නොවැම්බර් 20 වෙනිදා පැවතිච්ච ජාතික පරිමාණ මහා වැඩ වර්ජන දෙක ගල්ලඟු වාහන කර්මාන්තේ, මෝටර කර්මාන්තේ හා පොදු ප්‍රවාහනයේ සිට සෞඛ්‍ය සේවය, බැංකුවා රක්ෂණ ශේෂ්ත්‍රය දක්වා විවිධාංශවල කම්පරුවන් ගෙන ගිය අනේක සටන්කාමී ක්‍රියාවන් මේවට ඇතුළත් වෙනවා. මෙම වර්ජන සහ විරෝධතා මෝදි ආණ්ඩුවේ පුද්ගලීකරණ වැඩපිළිවෙලට අප්පාදු පිළිවෙත් වලට සහ සෙසු ආයෝජන ගැති පිළිවෙත් වලට අභියෝග කරලා තියෙනවා. BJPයේ කුසි ව්‍යාපාරික ගැති ගොවි ජන පනත් වලට එරෙහිව ලක්ෂ සංඛ්‍යාත ගොවීන් ගෙන යන දැන් මාස 7ක් වන විරෝධතා ව්‍යාපාරයෙන් මගින් මෝදි ආණ්ඩුව සොලවා ගන්න ලැබ එම පනත් ක්‍රියාත්මක කිරීම తాවකාලිකව පමා කරන්න මෝදි ආණ්ඩුවට බල කෙරලා තියෙනවා. ලාභ වලට ඉහළින් ජීවිත වලට ප්‍රමුඛතාව දෙන ආකාරයේ විද්‍යාත්මක ප්‍රතිචාරයක් වසංගතයට දක්වීමේලා කම්පුරු පන්තියට ඉටු කරන්න පුළුවන් වුණත් වෙන ඒ වගේම ඉටු කරන්න ඕන ක්‍රියාකලාපය අවධාරණය කරන වැදගත් වර්ධනයක් පෞද්ගලික දවස්වල පෙන්වු කෙරුණා. ඒ තමයි තමිල්නාඩුවේ හුන්ඩායි සංකීර්ණයක මෝටර කම්පනුව COVID-19 ආරක්ෂක විධිවිධාන නොමැතිකම එලා දැකීමෙන් මේ සතියේ වඩලා ගැනීමේ වර්ජනයක නිරත වීම. එහි ප්‍රතිඵලයක් ලෙස කොරියානු මෝටර රථ නිෂ්පාදන සමාගමට ඒ කම්මලේ වැඩ කටයුතු తాවකාලිකව අත්හිටුවන්න බල කෙරුවා. ඒ වගේම මේ ආසන්නයේ පිහිටි ඒ කලාපයේ පිහිටි රේනෝල් නිසාන් කම්මලේද එවන් වර්ජනයක් ඇතිවීමේ තර්ජනය නිසා ඒ බහුජාතික මෝටර රථ සමාගමටද ඒ ආකාරයටම පියවර ගන්න බල කෙරුවා. මහජන විරුද්ධත්වයේ වර්ධනයට මෝදි ආණ්ඩුව ප්‍රතිචාර දක්වලා තියෙන්නේ මර්ධන පිළිවෙත් මුදා හැරීම, කම්පරු පන්තිය දුර්වල හා ભેද කිරීම පිණිස වර්ගෝත්තතාවය ඇවිලවීම සහ ආචාදායක පාන් රූපයන් සඳහා වන තමන්ගේ සැලසුම් උත්සාහ කිරීම මගින් මෝදි ආණ්ඩුවේ සහ ඉන්දියානු පාලක ප්‍රභූවේ සමූහ ප්‍රතිසංස්කරණ පිළිවෙතට අභියෝග කරමින් සමාජවාදී සමානත්වයේ අපි අවධාරණය කර සිටිනවා මහ ව්‍යාපාරිකයන්ගේ ලාභ වලට ඉහළින් කම්පරුවන්ගේ හා ගම්බද දුගීන්ගේ ජීවිත වලට ප්‍රමුඛතාවය දිය යුතුයි. අන් සියල්ලන්ටම ඉහළින් බලපවත්වන එම මූලධර්මයේ මත පාදක වෙලා අපි මේ මාරාන්තික වසංගතයට එරෙහිව සටන් වදින්න මේ පහත සඳහන් ඉල්ලීම් ඉදිරිපත් කර අත්‍යවශ්‍ය නොවන සියලු සේවාවන් මසා දමමින් අගුළු දැනීමක් ක්‍රියාවට පැමිණ යුතුයි. අවදිමත් අංශයේ සේවය නියුතු අය මිලියන සංඛ්‍යාත සංකම්මික කම්පරුවන් ස්වන් රැකියා නියුක්තකයන් සුළු ව්‍යාපාර හිමියන් දුගී ගොවියන් දීවරයන් ඇතුළු සියලු කම්පරුවන්ට පූර්ණ වැටුප් ගෙවිය යුතුයි. ශක්ති සේවාව, විදුලි බලාංශය, විදුලි සංදේශ, ආහාර නිෂ්පාදනය වැනි අත්‍යවශ්‍ය සේවාවල කම්පරුවන්ට ඉතාම අනර්ග මට්ටමේ පුජ්‍යලික ආරක්ෂක උපකරණ PPE ලබා දී යුතුයි. ඒ වගේම උන් ආසාදරණ ලක්වුණොත් උන්ට වෛද්‍ය ප්‍රතිකාර ලබා දී යුතුයි. කම්පනුන්ගේ රැකියා, වැටුප් සහ සෙසු දීමනා කිසිවක් අප්පාදු නොකළ යුතුයි. ඒ වගේම සියල්ලන්ට නොමිලේ ඉඩක් ලබා දී යුතුයි. ඒ වගේම වසංගතයටද දරිද්‍රතාව, ජරා ජීර්ණකම හා මන්ද පෝෂණය හේතු කොටගෙන ඉන්දියානු වැඩ කරන ජනතාවට මුණ දෙන්න සිදු වෙලා තියෙන සියලු සෞඛ්‍ය ගැටලුවලට එරෙහිව සටන් වැදීම පිණිස මහජන සෞඛ්‍ය සේවාව නගා සිටුවීම සඳහා පැවන්ත පරිමාණව මූල්‍ය සම්පත් වෙන් කළ යුතුයි. දේශපාලන තාස්ථාපිතේ පක්ෂ, ධනේශ්වර මාධ්‍ය, ස්ටැලින් වාදී, වෘත්තීය සමිති නිලධාරී ඒ හැම කෙනෙක්ම එකවම්ම හඬතලනවා ඇති මේ වගේ වැඩ පිළිවෙලක් ක්‍රියාවට දාන්න මුදල් කොහෙද තියෙන්නේ කියලා. අපි කියා සිටිනවා ඒ සඳහා මූල්‍ය සම්පත් උමනාවටත් වඩා තියෙනවා කියලා. ඒ මූල්‍ය සම්පත් දූෂිත ධනාශ්‍රය ප්‍රභූව තනි අතේ ගොනු කරගෙන ගොඩ ගහගෙන ඉන්නවා. සංගත බිලියනපතියන් සහ මූල්‍ය අධිපතියන් ගොඩ ගහගෙන ඉන්නේ දැවන්ත ධනය ඔවුන්ගේ අත්පත් කරගෙන සමාජ අවශ්‍යතා සපුරාලීම සඳහා යෙදුවෙමි. මේක සාක්ෂාත් කරගන්න පුළුවන් වෙන්නේ ස්වකීය අවශ්‍යතාවයන් සඳහා සටන් වැදින කම්පරු පන්තියේ ස්වාධීන දේශපාලන මැදිහත් වීමක් මගින් පමණයි. ලෝක පුරා ඔවුන්ගේ පන්ති සංගයන් මෙන්ම ඉන්දියානු ස්ටැලින් වාදීන් සහ ඔවුන්ගේ සමිති කම්පරු පන්තියේ බලය එයාකාරයේ බලමුළු ගැනීමකින් සිදු කිරීම වළක්වීම සමහා වේතනත කළ වැඩ කරනවා. ධනේශ්වර සංස්ථාපිතේ පක්ෂවලට ඒ කියන්නේ මෑතක් පෙරමුණු ඉන්දියාවේ පාලක පන්තියේ වැඩි මනාපය ලැබූ ජාතික මට්ටමේ ආණ්ඩු පක්ෂයේ විදිහට තිබ්බ කොංග්‍රස් පක්ෂයට සහ විවිධාකාර දක්ෂිණාංශික ජනවාරික ප්‍රාදේශීය සහ කුල පාදක පක්ෂවලට කම්පර පන්තිය දේශපාලනිකව යටත් කිරීමේ මේ ස්ටැලින් ඔවුන්ගේ ද්‍රෝහි ප්‍රයත්නයන් ස්ටැලින් වාදීන් දැන් වඩා වේගවත් කරලා තියෙනවා. ඉන්දියානු කම්පරුවන් ස්ටැලින් වාදීන්ගෙන් හා ඔවුන්ගේ සමිති වලින් සංවිධානය ලෙස සහ දේශපාලනිකව බිඳිය යුතුයි. ඔවුන් තමන්ගේ සෞඛ්‍ය හා වැඩපොළ ආරක්ෂාව සඳහාද රැකියා, වැටුප් සහ ශිෂ්ට සම්පන්න සේවා හා ජීවන කොන්දේසි වැනි මූලික අයිතීන් සඳහාද සටන් මැදීම පිණිස තමන්ගේම ස්වාධීන ක්‍රියාකාරී කමිටු පිහිටුවා ගත යුතුයි. මේ කමිටු ධනවාදය විසින් ඔවුන්ගේ මූලික අවශ්‍යතාවයන් අහිමි කරනු ලැබීමට එරෙහිව ඔවුන් ආරක්ෂා කරනු පිණිස සමාජවාදී වැඩපිළිවෙලක් ඉදිරිපත් කරමින් පීඩිත ගම්බද ජනයා අන් සියල්ලන්ට වඩා කෝටි සංඛ්‍යාත කෘෂිකාර්මික කම්පනයන් සහ සුළු ගොවීන් රැලි කර ගැනීමේලා නායකත්වය දිය යුතුයි. මේ කමිටු හරහා ඉන්දියානු කම්පනුව පාකිස්තානය, බංග්ලාදේශය, නේපාලය හා ශ්‍රී ලංකාව ඇතුළු දකුණු ආසියාව පුරාද උතුරු ඇමරිකාවේ හා යුරෝපයේ අධිරාජ්‍යවාදී මධ්‍යස්ථානවලද සිටින තමන්ගේ පන්ති සහෝදර සහෝදරයන් සමග සිය අරගලයන් ඒකාබද්ධ කිරීමට සටන් වෙන්නේ. එම අරමුණ සඳහා ඉන්දියානු කම්පරුවන් ලෝක පරිමාණ පදනමක ඔවුන්ගේ අරගල සම්බන්ධීකරණය කිරීම හා ඒකාබද්ධ කිරීම පිණිස කම්පරුවන්ට නව මාවතක් සපයීමට මෑතදී පැවති මේ දින රැළියේදී හතරවන ජාත්‍යන්තර කමිටුව විසින් පිළිතුරු ලද ක්‍රියාකාරී කමිටුවල ජාත්‍යන්තර කම්පරු සම්දානය ගොඩනැගීමට සහයෝගය දී. දේශ සීමා නොහඳුනන වෛරස් එකකින් හටගත්තු මේ වසංගතය ගෝලීය. එනිසා ඒක තනියටත් තුරන් කරන්න බෑ. ගෝලීය ධනවාදයේ විසින් උපදවන ලද හා ප්‍රධාන බලවතුන් අතර පවත්නා දියුණු අන්තර්රාජ්‍ය එදිරිවාදීකම් තුල ප්‍රකාශිත මේ ජාතික සතුරුකම් වසංගතයට එරෙහිව සටන් වැදීමේලා බාධාමන් ලෙස සෑම අවස්ථාවකදීම ඉස්මත්තට ඇවිල්ලා තියෙනවා. වසංගතයේ හමුවේ පැනූ ඒ සියලු සීමාවන් ඉක්මනින් ඉවත් කරන්න සෑම රටකම ආණ්ඩුවට පවතින අධිෂ්ඨානය බොහෝ සෙයින් දෝනු ලබන්නේ ආයෝජන වෙනදපොළවල්ලා අමුද්‍රව්‍ය සඳහා වන ගෝලීය අරගලය ඇතුලේ තමන්ගේ ප්‍රතිවාදීන්ට වාසියක් වෙන්න පුළුවන් කියලා පවතින බීතිය මගින්. වසංගතයෙන් වැටකාපු ඉන්දියානු ආර්ථිකයට යලි පණ දීමේ මෝදීගේ සැලසුම් වලට කේන්ද්‍රීය වන අංගයක් තමයි චීනයට විකල්ප ලාභ ශ්‍රම නිෂ්පාදන ජාල මධ්‍යස්ථානයක් හැටියට ඉන්දියාවට සේවය කරන්න පුළුවන් කියලා ඇමරිකානු, යුරෝපීය සහ ජපාන අධිරාජ්‍යවාදීන්ට හේතු ගැනීමේ ඔහුගේ ප්‍රයත්නය. මෙය චීනයට එරෙහි වොෂින්ටනයේ යුදගිනි අවුලන ආකාරයේ මිලිටරි මූලෝපායක ප්‍රහාරාත්මක ව්‍යාපාරයට ඉන්දියාව පෙර නූරු ලෙස පරිපූර්ණව ඒකාග්‍ර කිරීම මගින් තමන්ගේ ඒ මහා බල අභිලාෂයන්ට රුකුල් දෙන්න ඉන්දියානු ධනේස්තරය ගෙනියන ධාවනයේ ආර්ථික සංරචකයන්. එන්නත් ජාතිකවාදයේ පැන නැගීම වසංගතයට විද්‍යාව මත පාදක ගෝලීය ප්‍රතිචාරයක් සංවිධානය කිරීමේලා ධනවාදයට පවතින පරිපූර්ණ නොහැකියාව පිළිබඳ තවත් තිබුණා. අඩුවෙල එන්නත් ඉපදෙන ලෝකයේ ප්‍රධානම රට වන ඉන්දියාව අඩු ගානේ මේ අවුරුද්දේ අවසානයේ වන තෙක් සියලු කොවිඩ් එන්නත් අපනයනය කිරීම තහනම් කළා තියෙනවා. ඒ නිසා අප්‍රිකාවේ සහ ආසියාවේ ඌණ සම්මිලිත රටවල වෙසෙන කෝටි සංඛ්‍යාත ජනයාට එන්නත් අහිමි කරලා තියෙනවා. ඒ වගේම එක්සත් ජනපදයේ එන්නත්ද ඒවා නිපදවන්න අවශ්‍ය අමුද්‍රව්‍යද අපනයනය කිරීම තහනම් කළා. මේ ප්‍රතිඵලයක් හැටියට ඉන්දියාවේ එන්නත් නිෂ්පාදනයට බාධා පැමිණලා තියෙනවා. වොෂින්ටනයට නම් මේ කොවිඩ් එන්නත කියන එක මනුස්ස ජීවිත ගලවා ගැනීමේ මාධ්‍යයක් නෙවෙයි. තමන්ගේ කොල්ලකාරී භූදේශපාලනික හා රාජතාන්ත්‍රික අවශ්‍යතා හඹා යාමේදී පාවිච්චි කරන අවියක්. මේ සියල්ල මගින් පැහැදිලි කරන්නේ ධනවාදයේ අතාර්කික ස්වභාවය සහ අසාර්ථකත්වය. ලෝකයේ අතිමහත් බහුතරයකට COVID-19 එන්නත් අහිමි කරමින් තනි රටක් තුලේ සියලු දෙනාට එන්නත් කරලා වසංගතය පාලනය කරන්න පුළුවන් කියලා අදහසක් පවතින එක සම්පූර්ණ මායාවක්. ඒ මොකද කියතොත් වෛරසය අකණ්ඩ පැතිරීම එන්නත් වලට ප්‍රතිරීධ වීමේ විභවයේ සහිත ප්‍රභේදද ඇතුළත් නව වඩා ආක්‍රමණික වෛරස් ප්‍රභේද පැන නගින්න ඉඩ සැලසෙන නිසා. කොරෝනා වෛරස් වසංගතයට ගෝලීයව සම්බන්ධීකృత හදිසි ප්‍රතිචාරයක් සඳහා කියන මාතෘකාවෙන් යුක්ත 2020 පෙබරවාරි 20 වෙනිදා ප්‍රකාශනයක්ද ඇතුව ජාත්‍යන්තර කමිටුව සහ ලෝක සමාජ වෙබ් අඩවිය වසංගතයේ ආරම්භයේ පටන්ම අවධාරණය කළ තියෙන පරිදි වෛරසයේ මැඩීම පිණිස සම්බන්ධීකృత විද්‍යාමත පාදක ගෝලීය ප්‍රයත්නයක් තුළ ලෝකයේ වෛද්‍ය මූල්‍ය ද්‍රව්‍ය හා සේවාමය සම්පත් බලමුළු ගන්නවා. එවන් වැඩපිළිවෙළ සඳහා අරගලයට නායකත්වයේ දීමට සමත් එකම සමාජ බලවේගය තමයි කිසිදු ජාතික රාජ්‍යයකට පුද්ගලික දේපලකට බැඳිලා නැති ජාත්‍යන්තර කම්පුරු පන්ති. සෑම රටකම වැඩ කරන ජනතාව වසංගතයට එරෙහිව සටන් වැදීම පිණිස ගෝලීය සම්පත් බලමුළු ගැන්වීමේලා නායකත්වයේ ගත යුතුයි. මෙම අරගලයට මඟ පෙන්වීමට අවශ්‍ය දේශපාලනික ඉදිරි දර්ශනය සමාජවාදී ජාත්‍යන්තරවාදය. මගේ කතාව સમાપ્ત කරමින් අපි ඉන්දියානු කම්පරු පන්තියෙන් ඉල්ලා සිටින්නේ ලෝක ධනවාදයට එරෙහිව ජාත්‍යන්තර සමාජවාදය පිණිසවන ඒකාබද්ධ ව්‍යාපාරය සඳහා දකුණු ආසියාවේ සහ ජාත්‍යන්තරව සිය පන්ති සහෝදරයන් සමග එක්වන ලෙසයි. එය දකුණු ආසියාවේ සහ ජාත්‍යන්තරව සමාජවාදී සමූහයන්ට සංගමයන් සඳහා අරගලයක් වෙනවා. ඉන්දියානු කම්පරු පන්තිය සඳහා අවශ්‍ය විප්ලවවාදී නායකත්වයේ තහවුරු කිරීම පිණිස හතුරුණ ජාත්‍යන්තරයේ ජාත්‍යන්තර කමිටුවේ ශාඛාවක් ඉන්දියාව තුළ පිහිටුව යුතුයි. ශ්‍රී ලංකාවේ සමාජවාදී සමනතා පක්ෂය ජාත්‍යන්තර කමිටුව සහ එහි ශාඛා සමග සමීප දේශපාලන සහයෝගයෙන් යුක්තව ඉන්දියාව තුළ දකුණු ආසියාව පුරා ජාත්‍යන්තර කමිටුවේ ශාඛා ගොඩනැගීමට සටන් වදිනවා. ඉන්දියාවේ හා දකුණු ආසියාවේ කම්පරුවන් තරුණයන් සහ සමාජවාදී හිතති උද්‍යපතින් ඇතුළු අද මේ රැස්වීමට සහභාගී වන ඔබ සියල්ලන්ගෙන්ම අපි ඉල්ලා සිටින්නේ මෙම අරගලයේ ඉදිරියට ගෙන යාම පිණිස සමාජවාදී සමානතා පක්ෂය සමග එක්වන ලෙසයි. සාදර වරණේ ඔබට පෙරවින් ස්තුතියි.
Thank you, Comrade Jayasekara. Now I would like to introduce Comrade Joe Kishore, National Secretary of Socialist Equality Party of the United States. He's an extensive writer, mainly on United States and others as well. He's today speaking from the US. Please welcome Comrade Joe Kishore.
Thank you, Comrade Saman. And I want to extend my warm and fraternal greetings to members of the Socialist Equality Party and supporters, as well as workers and youth in Sri Lanka, India, and beyond who are listening to this meeting. I'm very honored to speak to this meeting on behalf of the Socialist Equality Party in the United States. Titanic and terrible events are now unfolding in India. The level of death and destruction wrought by the pandemic and the criminal response of the BJP government of Modi is almost incomprehensible. Workers throughout the world have viewed in horror the images of overflowing crematoriums and a healthcare system that is collapsing under the impact of an endless stream of new cases. India is now the epicenter of a disease that has ravaged the entire globe. The worldwide death toll now exceeds 3.5 million people, according to the official figures that far understate the reality. 3.5 million people. Here in the United States, more than 600,000 people have died based on official reports, though estimates place, in fact, the real toll at closer to 1 million. The death toll in Brazil is now approaching 500,000. In Mexico, more than 220,000. In the UK and Italy, more than 125,000 each. A staggering loss of life. As workers throughout the world consider the experiences of the pandemic, the initial shock is already giving way to anger, outrage, and demands for accountability. How did this happen? Who is responsible? How can the ongoing carnage be stopped? Here in the United States, the ruling class is currently engaged in a furious campaign to blame China for the spread of the disease. Discredited and unfounded theories first promoted last year by the Trump administration and the fascistic right that the virus originated in a laboratory in China and perhaps was even the product of biological engineering. These theories are being legitimized and promoted now by the media and the entire political establishment. There are transparent political motivations behind this campaign. The leaders of all the major capitalist governments are swimming in blood. Millions of people have died unnecessarily as a result of deliberate decisions taken at the highest level of the state to reject public health measures that would save lives. The same indifference, the same criminality that Kamar Jayasekara reviewed in relationship to the policy of the Modi government in India has been implemented in every major capitalist country. They are responsible for a policy of social murder. It is a fact of enormous significance that the United States, the center of world capitalism and the home of Wall Street, has seen the largest number of deaths from the pandemic. Despite its vast wealth and its control of the most advanced technologies, the pandemic has exposed a social and political system that is incapable of meeting the needs of the vast majority of the population. One principle has governed the response of the ruling class to the pandemic from the beginning: that no action could be taken that undermine the interests of the corporations or threaten the share values on Wall Street. Government policy, first under Trump and now under Biden, has been directed not at saving lives and eradicating the pandemic, but at perpetuating the stock market boom and furthering the geostrategic interests of American imperialism. In March of last year, now more than 1 year ago, the US Congress passed the so-called CARES Act, which financed the multi-trillion-dollar bailout of the banks and Wall Street speculators. Once the interests of the oligarchy had been secured, the campaign began to insist that the cure can't be worse than the disease. That is, that the lives of millions of workers and youth had to be sacrificed for profit. The Trump administration spearheaded this campaign to remove even the most limited restrictions that had been put in place. But it had the support of both capitalist parties in the US, the Republicans and the Democrats, along with the media and, critically, the trade unions. The consequences of this policy were both predictable and predicted: a massive surge in new cases and deaths. Similar policies were implemented in all the major capitalist countries. In the UK this past week, a former advisor of Boris Johnson further confirmed that the UK government implemented a policy that it had calculated would lead to the deaths of as many as 800,000 people. In Brazil, the government of Jair Bolsonaro deliberately implemented a policy of allowing the virus to spread without its restraint, anticipating that the death toll could reach as high as 1.4 million. And amidst this mass death and social misery, the fortunes of the oligarchy have soared to new heights. The collective wealth of US billionaires, just 660 people, rose more than $1.1 trillion since mid-March of 2020, 1 year ago. The British Financial Times reported yesterday that the market in super yachts is surging as, quote, the wealthy seek luxury and seclusion to, quote, escape crowds and the threat of COVID-19, end quote. One could hardly have a more clear and damning indictment of the entire social and economic order. The International Committee of the Fourth International has defined the pandemic as a trigger event. By this we mean an event that accelerates and intensifies the underlying contradictions and tendencies of the capitalist system. We have seen over the past 15 months the ruling class response to the pandemic. The policy of mass death has coincided with a turn ever more openly to dictatorial forms of rule. At the beginning of this year, a fascistic insurrection was organized by the Trump administration in the US on January 6th, with a collaboration of the entire Republican Party that had as its aim the overthrow of an election and the establishment of a dictatorship. This was not, however, an isolated incident. It expressed something deeply diseased in the whole social and political system. Biden and the Democrats are now in power, but the basic ruling class policy is being pursued. Even though 500 people in the US are dying from the pandemic every day, Biden has essentially declared it over. The Centers for Disease Control has, under the administration's direction, even removed regulation on the wearing of masks in public places. Meanwhile, the Democrats are spearheading the militarist campaign against China. On Friday, the Biden administration released its budget proposal for the coming year that is centered on a record military budget of $753 billion, including $24.7 billion for nuclear weapons modernization. Nuclear weapons. Jayaseka reported that it would cost $6.4 billion to finance a vaccination program to provide free vaccines to everyone in India. $6.4 billion. While American imperialism is spending 4 times this amount to modernize its weapons of mass destruction. And as Israel carried out its criminal assault on Gaza this month, it found in its most steadfast ally in the US under the leadership of Biden. Now, the other side of this process is the growth of opposition in the working class. The experience of the past year has not been in vain. It has had a profoundly radicalizing impact on the consciousness of masses of workers and youth throughout the world. For workers around the world, critical questions of program and perspective are raised. Jayaseka referred to the fact that auto workers in India this past week took courageous action to stop the pandemic, which is part of a broader movement of workers in India as the pandemic spreads without restraint. In Chennai now, the auto companies have just announced that the Tamil Nadu state government has released an order to continue production, that the auto plants must continue, placing the lives of auto workers, their families, and the public at large at risk. And for what reason are auto workers being continued to forced to work in India? For what reason? There's only one reason: profit. As in the case throughout this global catastrophe, the lives of workers are being sacrificed to the profits of the corporations and the banks. And workers have taken courageous action to try to stop this insane and criminal policy. Workers in India should also study the experience here in the United States. In March of 2020, auto workers in the US, along with workers in Canada and Europe, stopped work on the line and demanded that non-essential production be halted. At this early stage in the pandemic, the spontaneous response of workers forced governments to implement partial lockdowns and other measures that scientists insisted were necessary to stop the spread of the disease. While workers acted courageously, they lacked the necessary organizational forms and political perspective to transform this outburst of opposition into a movement that could put an end to the source of the problem, the capitalist system. The ruling class regrouped, it passed its bailout for the rich, and then proceeded with its campaign to force workers back on the job. Now, the trade unions have played an absolutely critical role in assisting the ruling class in implementing its homicidal policies. Far from organizing opposition among workers, the trade unions have collaborated in the keeping of schools and businesses open. More than 600,000 people have died in the United States, and the trade unions have not organized a single struggle of workers aimed at stopping the carnage. Indeed, a section of the ruling class, and Biden is leading this, sees in the existing trade unions critical instruments for suppressing working class opposition. Moreover, the development of a government-sponsored and state-controlled labor movement is a strategic imperative for American imperialism as it prepares an ever more direct confrontation with China. Last month, Biden announced a task force to promote the unions that includes as prominent members both Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and Treasury Secretary and former Federal Reserve Chairman Janet Yellen. That is a panel to promote the unions that is led by the two chief representatives of American imperialism and finance capital. There is, however, a growing movement of the working class to break free from the strangleholds of the unions, which is ignored by the media in this country and throughout the world. In Virginia, workers at Swedish-owned Volvo Trucks have established a rank-and-file committee to oppose the efforts of the United Auto Workers to sabotage their strike last month and then to impose a contract dictated by the company. Workers are currently mobilizing to defeat a new contract and are beginning to reach out to fellow workers throughout the country to coordinate their struggles. In the southern US state of Alabama, 1,100 miners have been on strike since April, and they overwhelmingly rejected a contract brought back by the United Mine Workers. Over the past week, leading officials of the United Mine Workers Union have resorted to violence and thuggery, specifically targeting the World Socialist website, but directed above all at intimidating opposition among workers to the sellout of their strike. In the northern US, 1,300 steelworkers have been on strike for 2 months against Allegheny Technology. They too have been isolated by the unions, in this case the United Steelworkers, but have repeatedly resisted and rejected ultimatums from the company. These are only a few of the initial expressions of working class anger and opposition in the United States, which have included healthcare workers, educators, logistics workers, and other sections of the working class. Workers in India, the South Asian subcontinent, and all around the world must be made aware of these important developments. The United States is not just American imperialism, which is threatening war against China and which acts as a bulwark of reaction in every country, including the critical support from both the Trump administration and the Biden administration for the right-wing government of Narendra Modi. The US is not just American imperialism and the American ruling class, it is also the American working class, the natural allies of workers throughout the world. The experiences of the past year and a half and the ongoing catastrophe will have a lasting impact. The policy of the ruling class in response to the pandemic has not only produced mass death and social misery, it is also the breeding ground for revolution. It is on this basis that the International Committee of the Fourth International has launched the initiative for the International Workers' Alliance of Rank-and-File Committees. In our statement announcing the formation of the IWA-RFC, the ICFI explained that its aim is to create new mechanisms through which the working class can, quote, coordinate its struggles in different factories, industries, and countries in opposition to the ruling class and the corporatist unions. The IWA-RFC will be, quote, a means through which workers throughout the world can share information and organize a united struggle to demand protection for workers, the shutdown of unsafe facilities and non-essential production, and other emergency measures that are necessary to stop the virus and save lives. The development of this alliance must be on a global scale, as it is only through a united movement of workers throughout the world that the pandemic can be stopped and all the problems produced by capitalism can be fought. A counteroffensive of the working class requires, above all, the construction of a revolutionary leadership. And there is no movement outside of the world Trotskyist movement, the International Committee of the Fourth International, that is building this leadership. The ICFI bases itself on immense historical traditions. There's a history that extends back to the founding of scientific socialism by Marx and Engels, through the Russian Revolution of 1917, through the struggle led by Leon Trotsky against Stalinism. It is a tradition that has fought implacably for the perspective of international socialist revolution. I urge all of you who are participating in this meeting in Sri Lanka, in India, and throughout the world to make the decision to help to build the Socialist Equality Party and to develop a section of the ICFI in India as an absolutely critical component of the building of the ICFI as the World Party of Socialist Revolution. Thank you, comrades. Saman, I believe you're muted.
Sorry for that. And yeah, Joe, thank you so much for that analysis. And I have to say a couple of things here. One thing is that regarding the chat, whatever you want to put in the chat, you can put, and you can ask any questions. Your identity will be retained with the organizers only. So please feel free to put your questions into the chat column. And also I trust most of you participating in this meeting tonight are regular readers of our main daily publication, World Socialist website. If not, please visit www.wsws.org, and we invite you to be a regular reader. This is the only genuine Marxist, Trotskyist web portal you can come across to get involved in the revolutionary working class perspective. Also, I would like to request the listeners to make a decision today to join with us in order to build the Socialist Equality Party in India and throughout South Asia as sections of the International Committee of the Fourth International. And this, I'm sure, will become the most important decision you made in your lifetime. In your lifetime, yes. So please contact us to discuss any clarifications you have in this regard. So you can see the contact details in this slide. So with that request, I would like to introduce Comrade M. Devaraja, a long-standing political committee member of Socialist Equality Party of Sri Lanka. Today, he's speaking from Sri Lanka, and he will speak in Tamil. And his sort of his English subtitles in his speech. His speech will be put on as with English subtitles. So, Comrade Devaraja, please welcome Comrade Devaraja.
தோழர்களே, தொற்றுநோயை பற்றியும் சோசலிச மூலோபாயத்தின் அவசியம் பற்றி பேசுவதற்காக ஏற்பாடு செய்யப்பட்டிருக்கும் இந்த கூட்டமானது முதலாளித்துவத்தால் உருவாக்கப்பட்டுள்ள பேரழிவுக்கு எதிராக சர்வதேச தொழிலாளி வர்க்கத்தை அணுகுவதற்கான போராட்டத்தின் ஒரு முக்கிய முன்னகர்வாக இது இருக்கிறது. COVID-19 தொற்று நோயானது மனித உயிர்களுக்கும் மேலாக லாபத்தை முன்னிறுத்துவதன் அடிப்படையிலான குற்றவியல் கொள்கையை முன்னெடுக்கும் கூட்டுத்தாபனங்கள் மற்றும் அரசாங்கங்களையும் எதிர்த்து அமெரிக்கா, ஐரோப்பா, இந்தியா, இலங்கை உட்பட எல்லா இடங்களிலும் போராட்டங்களை தூண்டிவிட்டுள்ளது. இந்த சூழ்நிலையில் கடந்த மே தினத்தன்று நடவடிக்கை குழுக்களில் சர்வதேச தொழிலாளர் கூட்டணியை அமைப்பதற்கான 4ஆம் அகிலத்தின் அனைத்துலக குழுவின் கூட்டத்தில் விடுக்கப்பட்ட அழைப்பு மிகவும் முக்கியத்துவம் வாய்ந்ததாகும். ஒவ்வொரு நாட்டிலும் வேலை செய்யும் இடங்களிலும் சுயாதீன நடவடிக்கை குழுக்களை அமைப்பதும் தொழிலாளர்களின் சர்வதேச கூட்டணியை கட்டியெழுப்புவதும் முதலாளித்துவ வர்க்கத்தால் கட்டவிழ்த்து விடப்பட்டிருக்கும் தாக்குதலுக்கு எதிராக ஒரு எதிர் தாக்குதலை கட்டியெழுப்புவதற்கு தொழிலாளி வர்க்கத்திற்கு ஒரு பாதையை வழங்கும். இந்தியாவில் வலதுசாரி பாரதிய ஜனதா கட்சி தலைமையிலான அரசாங்கம் வெளிநாட்டு மற்றும் உள்நாட்டு முதலீட்டாளர்களின் பேராசை கொண்ட லாப நோக்கங்களை பாதுகாப்பதன் பேரில் சீறிப்பரவும் புற்றுநோய்க்கு தொழிலாளர்களின் உயிர்களை பலிகொடுத்துக் கொண்டிருக்கின்றது. இந்த ஈவிரக்கமற்ற மற்றும் கொலைகார கொள்கைக்கு எதிராக இந்தியாவில் பல மில்லியன் கணக்கான தொழிலாளர்களின் சமூக எதிர்ப்பு பரந்துபட்ட அளவில் வளர்ச்சி கண்டு வருகின்றது. கடந்த வாரம் இந்தியாவின் தமிழ்நாடு மாநிலத்தில் தொழிற்சாலைகள் அமைக்கப்பட்டிருக்கும் ஸ்ரீபெரும்புதூர், ஓரக்கடம் பகுதியில் உள்ள கொண்டாய் மோட்டார்ஸ் மற்றும் ரொனால்ட் டிசால் பன்னாட்டு வாகன தயாரிப்பு தொழிற்சாலைகளில் தொழிலாளர்கள் கிளர்ந்தெழுந்த காரணத்தினால் ஆலைகளை மூட வேண்டி நேர்ந்தது. கொரோனாவினால் நூற்றுக்கணக்கானவர்கள் பாதிக்கப்பட்டு சுமார் 20 தொழிலாளர்கள் மரணமடைந்துள்ளதாக அறிவிக்கப்பட்டுள்ளது. COVID-19 தொற்றிலிருந்து பாதுகாக்கும் நடைமுறைகள் போதுமானவர்கள் இல்லாமையினால் பாதுகாப்பற்ற வேலை நிலைமைகளை எதிர்த்தே தொழிலாளர்கள் போராட்டம் செய்துள்ளனர். மற்றொரு தொழில்துறை பகுதியான டெல்லிக்கு பக்கத்தில் இருக்கும் குர்கான் பகுதியில் சமீபத்தில் அதிகரித்த COVID-19 நோய் தொற்றால் 20க்கும் மேற்பட்ட தொழிலாளர்கள் இறந்துள்ளனர். இறந்தவர்களில் குர்கானில் உள்ள மாருதி சுசுகியின் ஆலையில் 5 தொழிலாளர்களும், ஹோண்டா ஆலையில் 2 தொழிலாளர்களும், டாடா மோட்டார் ஆலையில் 1 தொழிலாளியும் அடங்கும். மோடியின் அரசாங்கம் ஏப்ரல் மாத இறுதியில் இருந்து வணிக நடவடிக்கைகளை மீண்டும் திறந்துவிட்டு ஆளும் வர்க்கத்தின் முதலீட்டாளர்கள் சார்பு திட்டங்களை விரைவாக முன்னெடுப்பதற்கு தொற்று நோயை பயன்படுத்திக் கொண்டது. கடந்த அக்டோபர் மாதம் அவருடைய அரசாங்கம் ஒவ்வொரு துறையிலும் ஒப்பந்த தொழிலாளர்களை அமர்த்துவதை இலகுவாக்குவதற்காக சட்டத்தை உருவாக்கியுள்ளது. பன்னாட்டு வேளாண் வணிக நிறுவனங்களுக்கு பரந்தளவில் விவசாயத்தை திறந்து விடுவதற்கு வேளாண் சட்டங்களை கொண்டு வந்திருக்கின்றது. தொழிலாளர்கள் மத்தியில் ஆயிரக்கணக்கான மரணங்கள் நடந்துள்ளதுடன் லட்சக்கணக்கானவர்கள் தொற்று நோயால் பாதிக்கப்பட்டிருக்கின்றார்கள் என்ற செய்திகள் நாளாந்தம் வந்து கொண்டிருக்கின்றன. ஆனாலும் அவர்களுக்கான பதிவுகள் எதுவும் கிடையாது. லட்சக்கணக்கானவர்கள் தங்களது தொழில்களை இழந்திருக்கிறார்கள். நிரந்தர வேலைகள் இல்லாத பெருமளவு புலம்பெயர்ந்த தொழிலாளர்கள் மிக மோசமாக பாதிக்கப்பட்டுள்ளார்கள். எப்படி இருந்தாலும் உயிர்களை காப்பாற்ற அத்தியாவசியமற்ற தொழிற்சாலைகளையும் சேவை நடவடிக்கைகளையும் மூடுவதற்கு மோடியின் அரசு தயாராக இல்லை. தொழிலாளர்களிடமிருந்து லாபங்களை கலப்பதற்கான சிறந்த நிலைமைகளை உருவாக்குவதன் பேரில் முழு அடைப்புகளில் இருந்து இந்தியாவை பாதுகாப்பதே அவருடைய கொள்கையாக இருக்கின்றது. மோசமான வேலை நிலைமைகள், வணிகமட்டத்திலான ஊதியங்கள், வேலை இழப்புகள் மற்றும் தனிமனித பாதுகாப்பு உபகரணங்கள் பற்றாக்குறை போன்றவற்றால் இந்தியா முழுவதிலும் வேலைநிறுத்த போராட்டங்களும் ஆர்ப்பாட்டங்களும் வெடித்திருக்கின்றன. கடந்த நவம்பர் 26 அன்று புதிய தொழிலாளர் சட்டங்களை எதிர்த்தும் தொற்று நோய் காரணமாக வருமானத்தை இழப்பவர்களுக்கு சமூக உதவிகளை கோரியும் நடத்தப்பட்ட ஒரு நாள் தேசிய வேலைநிறுத்த போராட்டத்தில் கோடிக்கணக்கான தொழிலாளர்கள் பங்கு பெற்றினார்கள். கடந்த நவம்பர் மாதம் முதல் வேளாண் சட்டங்களை எதிர்த்து போராட்டங்கள் நடத்தும் விவசாயிகள் அவர்களுடைய போராட்டத்தை தொடர்ந்து கொண்டிருக்கின்றனர். எப்படி இருந்தாலும் ஒவ்வொரு நாட்டிலும் போலவே தொழிலாளர்கள் அவர்களுடைய போராட்டங்களை தடுக்கும் தொழிற்சங்கங்களை எதிர்கொள்கின்றனர். இந்தியாவில் ஸ்டாலினிச இந்திய மார்க்சிய கம்யூனிஸ்ட் கட்சியின் இந்திய தொழிற்சங்க மையம் CITU உட்பட முதலாளித்துவ சார்பு தொழிற்சங்கங்கள் தொழிலாளர்களை முதலாளித்துவ கட்டமைப்புகள் வைத்திருப்பதன் மூலம் தொழிலாளர்களின் அனைத்து போராட்டங்களை அடக்கி காட்டிக் கொடுத்துள்ளது. தொழிலாளர்களின் வேலைகள், ஊதியங்கள் மற்றும் எல்லாவற்றுக்கும் மேலாக கொடிய தொற்று நோயால் தொழிலாளருக்கு ஏற்பட்டிருக்கும் பேரழிவை சவால் செய்வதற்கு பதிலாக தொழிற்சங்கங்கள் உண்மையில் வணிகங்களை திறந்து விடுவதற்கும் அரசாங்கத்தினரும் முதலாளித்துவ வர்க்கத்தினரும் கொள்கையை ஆதரிக்கின்றன. இதே நடவடிக்கை தெற்காசியா முழுவதும் உண்மையானதாக இருக்கின்றது. இந்த விடயத்தில் நான் இலங்கையில் காணப்படும் நிலைமைகளை சுருக்கமாக விவரிக்க விரும்புகின்றேன். கடந்த வியாழக்கிழமை ஜனாதிபதி கோட்டபய ராஜபக்ஷ துறைமுகங்கள், பெட்ரோலியம், மின்சாரம், மத்திய வங்கி மற்றும் பிற அரசு வங்கிகள், பேருந்து மற்றும் ரயில்வே போக்குவரத்து உட்பட பெரும்பாலும் அனைத்து அரசு துறைகளை சேர்த்து ஒரு கடுமையான அத்தியாவசிய சேவைகள் ஒழுங்கு சட்டத்தை கொண்டிருக்கின்றது. இதற்கு உடனடியான காரணம் 12,000 அரசாங்க கிராம அலுவலர்கள் கொரோனா தடுப்பூசி கோரி வேலைநிறுத்தம் செய்தவையாகும். எனினும் மோசமடைந்து வரும் வாழ்க்கை நிலைமைகள் மற்றும் தொற்று நோய் சுமைகளுக்கு எதிரான போராட்டங்கள் வெடிப்பதற்கு இது வழிவகுத்துவிடும் என்ற அரசாங்கம் பீதி அடைந்துள்ளது. வேலைநிறுத்த போராட்டங்களுக்கு கடுமையான தண்டனைகளை பிரேரிக்கும் அத்தியாவசிய ஒழுங்கு நடவடிக்கை உத்தரவை எந்த ஒரு தொழிற்சங்கமும் எதிர்க்கவில்லை. தொழிற்சங்கங்கள் பொருளாதாரத்தை திரும்புவதற்கான அரசாங்கத்தினரும் முதலாளிகளின் கொள்கையுடன் நேரடியாக ஒத்துழைக்கின்றன. வேலைத்தளங்கள், குறிப்பாக ஆடை தொழிற்சாலைகள் COVID-19 தொற்றுக்கள் மிக வேகமாக பரவுவதற்கு ஏதுவாக இருக்கின்றன. ஆயிரக்கணக்கான தொழிலாளர்கள் பாதிக்கப்பட்டதுடன் பல தொழிலாளர்கள் மரணித்துள்ளார்கள். கடந்த வியாழக்கிழமை சுதந்திர வட்டார மற்றும் பொது வேலைகள் ஊழியர் சங்கத்தின் தலைவர் மார்க்கஸ் அவருடைய தொழிற்சங்கம் பாதிக்கப்பட்ட தொழிலாளர்களுக்காக இடைநிலை மருத்துவமனைகளை அமைப்பதையும் மற்றும் தொழிலாளர்களை வேலைக்கு போவதை தொடர்பதையும் ஆதரிப்பதாக அறிவித்துள்ளார். ராஜபக்ஷ அரசாங்கத்தின் ஒரு அமைச்சரான இலங்கை தொழிலாளர் காங்கிரஸ் தலைவர் ஜீவன் தொண்டமா COVID-19 பற்றி பயப்பட வேண்டாம், 2 கைகளை நன்கு பயன்படுத்தி தீரத்தை பறிக்க வேண்டும் என்று அவர் தொழிலாளருக்கு தோட்ட முக்கியமாக தேயிலை தோட்ட தொழிலாளருக்கு அவர் கூறுகின்றார், நீங்கள் உற்பத்தியை பெருக்கினால்தான் உங்களால் சம்பாதிக்க முடியும் அல்லது சம்பளம் உங்களுக்கு உயர்வாக கிடைக்கும் என்று கூறுகின்றார். இது நிறுவனங்களின் லாபத்தை பெருக்குவதற்கான எவ்வாறு இந்த தொழிற்சங்கங்கள் அர்ப்பணிப்புடன் செயல்படுகிறது என்பதை காட்டுகின்றது. இந்த ஆண்டின் ஆரம்பத்தில் அவருடைய தொழிற்சங்கம் ஓல்டன் தோட்ட கம்பெனி மற்றும் போலீசுடன் சேர்ந்து ஒரு டசன் கணக்கான தொழிலாளர் மீது பொய்யான குற்றங்களை சுமத்துவதற்கும் 38 தொழிலாளர்களை வீட்டுக்கு வேலையிலிருந்து நீக்குவதற்கும் நிர்வாகத்தோடு சேர்ந்து சரி செய்ததை நாங்கள் பார்க்கக்கூடியதாக இருந்தது. இதுக்கு எதிராக சோசலிச சமத்துவ கட்சி மட்டுமே இதுக்கு எதிரான போராட்டத்தை முன்னெடுத்தது. இந்த பழிவாங்களை எதிர்த்து அவர்களை பாதுகாப்பாக போராடி வருகின்றது. அவர்கள் மீது சுமத்தப்பட்ட குற்றச்சாட்டுகளிலிருந்து அவர்களை விடுவிப்பதற்கும் வேலை நீக்கம் செய்யப்பட்டவர்களை மறுபடியும் வேலையில் சேர்ப்பதற்கும் சோசலிச சமத்துவ கட்சி பிரச்சாரம் செய்கிறது. இந்த தொற்று நோய் இத்தகைய தொழிற்சங்கங்கள் முதலாளித்துவ வர்க்கத்துடனும் அதன் அரசாங்கத்துடனும் இயல்பாகவே துண்டிப்புடைந்துள்ளது என்பதை வெளிக்காட்டுகின்றது. முதலாளித்துவ லாப நோக்கான அமைப்பை பாதுகாக்க அர்ப்பணித்துக் கொண்டுள்ள தொழிற்சங்கங்கள் இருந்து பிரிந்தால் மட்டுமே தொழிலாளர்கள் ஆரோக்கியம் மற்றும் உயிர் வாழ்வு உட்பட அவர்களுடைய உரிமைகளுக்காக போராட முடியும். தொழிலாளர்கள் தொழிற்சங்கங்களிலிருந்து விலகி வேலை தளங்களில் சுயாதீன நடவடிக்கை குழுக்களை காட்டி வேண்டும். அப்போது மட்டுமே தொழிலாளர்கள் அரசாங்கத்தினரும் பெருவணிகத்தினரும் கொள்கைகளுக்கு எதிராக போராடுவதற்கு தங்களுக்கு ஒரு சுயாதீனமான பலத்தை அணிதிரட்ட முடியும். இந்த கொடிய தொற்று நோய்க்கு எதிரான போராட்டத்தை உலகளாவிய போராட்டமாக மட்டுமே முன்னெடுக்க முடியும். நாங்களும் நடத்துகிற குழு, அதன் சோசலிச சமத்துவ கட்சிகளும் மற்றும் உலக சோசலிச வலைத்தளமும் விளக்கியவாறு தொற்று நோய்க்கு தேசிய எல்லைகள் எதுவும் தெரியாது. மரண ஊழலோடும் முதலாளித்துவத்தில் பொதுவான அச்சுறுத்தலையே தொழிலாளர்கள் முகம் கொடுப்பதுடன் அவர்கள் சர்வதேச அளவில் ஒன்றுபட வேண்டும். அதை செய்வதற்கு தொழிலாளர் வர்க்கத்தை பிளவுவதற்கும் அதை முடக்குவதற்கும் முதலாளித்துவ வர்க்கம் அவர்களின் அரசாங்கங்களும் தூண்டப்படுகின்ற எல்லா வகையான இனவாதத்தையும் தேசியவாதத்தையும் தொழிலாளர்கள் நிராகரிக்க வேண்டும். நடவடிக்கை குழுக்களின் சர்வதேச தொழிலாளர் கூட்டணியை கட்டியெழுப்பதற்கான போராட்டத்தில் இணைய வேண்டும் என்று நாங்கள் இந்தியாவிலும் இலங்கையிலும் மற்றும் இந்த பிராந்தியம் முழுவதும் உள்ள தொழிலாளர்களுக்கு வேண்டுகோள் விடுக்கின்றோம். இது ஒரு அனைத்துலக வேலை திட்டத்துக்கான மற்றும் 4ஆம் அகிலத்தின் அனைத்துலக குழுவை கட்டியெழுப்பதற்கான போராட்டத்துடன் பின்னிப்பிணைந்திருக்கின்றது. நன்றி.
Thank you, Comrade Devaraja. At this meeting, the Socialist Equality Party Sri Lanka and the International Committee of the Fourth International reaffirmed their commitment to the fight for the immediate release of the 12 surviving Maruti Suzuki workers who have been jailed for life on frame-up charges. Their sole crime was to be in the leadership of a struggle at Maruti Suzuki's Manesa car assembly plant against poverty wages, contract labor, and a pro-company state-sponsored union. They were targeted for exemplary punishment by company management, the Haryana Congress Party state government, and the judiciary because the militant struggle at Maruti Suzuki's Manesa plant was becoming a pole of opposition throughout the Gurgaon Manesa industrial belt on the outskirts of Delhi. Their convictions for the death of a company manager from a fire that broke out amid a company-provoked factory floor altercation were a travesty based on fabricated evidence and deliberate mangling of the law. The Maruti Suzuki workers have been abandoned to their fate by the trade unions and Stalinist communist parties because waging a struggle for their freedom would cut across these organizations' cozy relations with the employers and alliance with the big business Congress party. The Indian and international working class must take up the cause of the Maruti Suzuki workers, who by standing up for decent paying, secure jobs, and an end to brutal working conditions against the Japanese-based transnational were striking a blow for workers in every country. The ACP and ICFI urge all workers to fight for the immediate release and exoneration of the Maruti Suzuki 12 and the paying of compensation to the workers and their families for the victimization and abuse perpetrated by the automaker and governments led by the Congress and BJP. With that message from SCP, Sri Lanka and ICFI, I would like to make a request for funds at this point from all of you to donate us generously and without hesitation for these most important political activities to organize the working class and oppressed people in the emancipatory path of socialism. I know the translation is a bit late. Can we go on the slides? These are the imprisoned Marutu Suzuki workers, what you can see on the screen. They are languishing in the jail for lifetime. Okay, can we go to the next slide? Yeah, so please donate, support the fight for socialism in 2021. Next slide, you will see the details of banking details, so that I would like to request again, please donate us generously for this work. We have to organize a section in India as well as the other countries in South Asia. For this fight, please donate funds as much as possible and decide it today. With that, now I would like to introduce Comrade Keith Jones, member of the WSWS International Editorial Board and National Secretary of Socialist Equality Party, Canada. In addition, he is also a leading expert on history and politics of South Asia and involved in ICFI work in South Asia region. Today, he is speaking from Montreal. Please welcome Comrade Keith Jones. He will be not on camera, but we will hear his sound. Comrade Keith.
Comrades and friends, little more than a few weeks ago, Narendra Modi, the Hindu supremacist thug who serves as India's prime minister, was claiming that India had shown the world how to defeat the COVID-19 virus. These ignorant remarks, along with his subsequent vow made on April 20th, amidst an exponential rise in COVID-19 infections and deaths, that his government would save India from lockdown, not the virus, will be inscribed on Modi's political tombstone. The catastrophe now engulfing India beggars description. As other speakers have explained, India is being ravaged by two pandemics, both of which are the product of the bourgeoisie's ruthless pursuit of its selfish class interests. A pandemic of infection and death by asphyxiation, and a pandemic of joblessness, wage cuts, and hunger. It is a fool's game to try to rank which capitalist ruling's elite's response to the pandemic has been the most calamitous. Around the world, and most notably in imperialist Europe and North America, capitalist governments, whether they're avowedly right-wing or ostensibly left, have let the virus run rampant to protect big business profits and investor wealth. The pandemic is a world health and social crisis for which the only answer is a global, science-based mobilization of resources to protect lives and working people's livelihoods. But everywhere, this imperative is in irreconcilable conflict with global capitalism, comes up against the reality that the most basic and essential human needs are subordinated to the pursuit of capitalist profit and the struggle among the rival, nationally based capitalist cliques for resources, markets, and geostrategic advantage. That said, the pandemic, and especially the horrors of the past 10 weeks, have enabled the entire world to see what was already apparent to hundreds of millions of Indian workers and toilers. India's purported capitalist rise, so celebrated in the media in the West, has produced a malignant society that exemplifies and embodies the dysfunction, brutality, and criminality of 21st century capitalism. South Asia remains deformed by the legacy of British colonial rule and subject to continuing imperialist oppression. Yet India is not a country without considerable human and material resources, industrial capacity, and in certain sectors, highly advanced technology. But these are monopolized by a tiny stratum of capitalist oligarchs and their state apparatus, and are deployed not to meet crying social needs, but to systematically increase the extraction of surplus value, of profit, from the labor of the working class and rural toilers. Thus, India's public health care system, notwithstanding the self-sacrifice of health workers, is a shambles and a sham. While India's billionaires have seen their fortunes almost double during the pandemic to almost $600 billion, the Modi government cannot find the resources to devote a minuscule 0.3% of GDP to providing free vaccinations to the Indian people. Demonstrating that the Indian elite's priorities lie in pursuing its predatory great power ambitions on the world stage and strengthening the repressive state machine that upholds its rule and wealth at home, the Modi government has proven able to fully inoculate more than 90% of India's armed forces against COVID-19, but just 3% of the population. The current crisis has laid bare what 3 decades of India's so-called new economic policy has wrought. 30 years ago, in July 1991, the Indian bourgeoisie repudiated its post-independence state-led development project, a nationalist strategy based on import substitution that it cynically labeled socialism, and initiated India's full integration into the US-led world capitalist order. Ever since, all national and state governments, including those supported or led by the Stalinist, Communist Party, Marxist, and Communist Party of India, the CPM and CPI, have relentlessly pushed forward with what are euphemistically called pro-investor policies: privatization, deregulation, the elimination of price subsidies, massive tax cuts for the big business and the rich, and the prioritizing of capitalist development projects over social infrastructure. This has gone hand in hand with an ever more pronounced orientation to Washington, codified since 2006 in a global Indo-US strategic partnership and an ever-expanding web of military ties. Over the past 3 decades, the Indian bourgeoisie has gorged on the ruthless exploitation of India's workers and toilers. They and their partners and patrons, the transnational corporations and the global investment firms, have appropriated the lion's share of the wealth created by India's capitalist expansion, as epitomized by the exponential growth of India's billionaires, from 2 in the mid-1990s to 140 or more today. This, in a country where hundreds of millions struggle to survive on less than 180 rupees or American $2.50, and more than 1 in 3 children is malnourished. Social inequality in India now rivals, if not surpasses, that at the height of the British Raj, with the richest 1% of Indians owning 4 times the wealth of the poorest 70%. The same Indian corporate media that fawns over the Ambanis, Adanis, Tatas, and other billionaires trumpets India's supposed increased stature in Washington, London, Paris, Berlin, and Tokyo. The reality is India is ever more a US crony and satrap, aiding and abetting American imperialism in its war drive against China, and through acts of omission and commission, conniving in the US imperialist attempt to economically strangle Iran and the imperialist subjugation of the Palestinian people. Indian military security experts now boast about India reprising the role it played for a century under the British Raj, when, to use their words, India was a net security provider in the Indo-Pacific region. That is, it supplied troops and cannon fodder for British imperialism's global operations, from the conquest of Burma and the suppression of the Boxer Rebellion in China to the 2 world wars of the last century. Indian workers must beware. Just as the ruling class has provided over untold death during the ongoing pandemic, so the military security alliance it has forged with US imperialism in pursuit of its own great power ambitions threatens to produce a catastrophe of incalculable proportions for the people of South Asia and the world. Indian capitalism's reactionary strategic conflicts with China and Pakistan have become inextricably enmeshed with the ever more explosive US-China conflict. Last year's border conflict with China in the Himalayas, in which Washington egged New Delhi on, was India's 4th war crisis with its 2 nuclear-armed neighbors since 2016. In response to the intensification of the global capitalist crisis produced by the pandemic, the Indian bourgeoisie is doubling down on the reactionary class strategy it has pursued since 1991. The Modi government's herd immunity, open economy policy is the cutting edge of an intensification of class war. As Modi dismantled the anti-COVID-19 measures last May, he announced what he termed a quantum jump in pro-investor reforms. Virtually all remaining public sector units or enterprises are being privatized. In September, the BJP government rammed through 3 pro-agribusiness laws and amended the labor code to further entrench precarious contract labor employment and illegalize most worker job action. So too, the Modi government, with corporate India's enthusiastic support, has integrated India still more fully into the US economic and military strategic offensive against China. In the past 12 months, it has dramatically expanded a vast web of bilateral, trilateral, and quadrilateral military strategic ties with Washington and its principal Asia-Pacific allies, Japan and Australia. These include the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, a quasi-military alliance that Biden hastened to raise to a new level within weeks of becoming president by convening the first ever heads of government Quad Summit. Underscoring the aggressive mindset of the Indian ruling class and the ever-swelling size of its reckless wager on propping up American imperialist global hegemony, the Modi government has placed the expansion of India's military-industrial sector and its emerger as a cheap labor subcontractor for the US armaments industry at the center of its Make in India industrial strategy. The past 3 decades, however, have given rise to more than just a rapacious Indian capitalism. They have also vastly increased the size and social power of the Indian working class, and through the process of integrated global production, enormously reinforced its objective unity with workers around the world, including in the advanced capitalist countries. Like the Russian working class at the beginning of the last century, the rapidly expanding Indian working class has shown great combativity and militancy. but its struggles have been systematically isolated and suppressed, and it has been politically disenfranchised. For this, the various Stalinist parties and their affiliated unions are principally responsible. For decades, the CPM and CPI and their left front have functioned as an integral part of the capitalist political establishment. When the Indian ruling class's state-led development strategy shipwrecked in 1991, the CPM and CPI propped up the Narasimha Rao Congress Party government that initiated neoliberal reform. And for the next 2 decades, they supported and helped cobble together a succession of coalition governments, most of them Congress Party led, that spearheaded the drive to make India a cheap labor haven for global capital and pursued ever closer ties to Washington. Moreover, whenever and wherever they have led state governments, the Stalinists have implemented what they themselves term pro-investor policies. For the past 30 years, the CPM and CPI have lionized the Congress Party, the historic party of the Indian bourgeoisie, and a host of right-wing, regional chauvinist and casteist parties as secular and democratic bulwarks against the BJP, whom the working class must support so as to defeat the Hindu supremacist right. To be sure, Modi and the RSS Sangh Parivar are the deadliest enemies of the working class. But in implementing pro-market reform and championing the Indo-US alliance, Modi and his BJP are only continuing down the path blazed by the Stalinist supported Congress-led governments that preceded it. The growth of communal reaction and the bourgeoisie's embrace of the would-be Hindu authoritarian strongman Modi speak to the acute crisis of Indian capitalism and underscore the urgency of the independent political mobilization of the working class, rallying the world toilers behind it in the fight for workers' power against the bourgeoisie and all its political representatives. It is precisely because the working class has been politically paralyzed by the Stalinist parties and trade unions and prevented from advancing its own socialist solution to endemic poverty, acute economic insecurity, and ever-widening social inequality that the BJP has been able to exploit mounting popular social anger and frustration to become India's most powerful political party. Democratic rights cannot be defended by clutching at the putrefying parties of the supposed democratic wing of the ruling class. Parties like the Congress, which for decades have connived with the Hindu right and imposed vicious anti-working class policies, but only through the mobilization of the working class in the struggle for socialism and its emergence thereby as the defender and leader of all the oppressed. This requires building new organizations of class struggle. Rank and file workplace committees are an essential weapon for workers to assert their class interests and break out of the straitjacket in which the trade unions have constrained and thwarted their struggles. The foremost task is the building of a revolutionary party of the working class, an Indian section of the International Committee of the Fourth International, based on the Socialist Internationalist strategy of permanent revolution. The program of permanent revolution animated the 1917 October Revolution in Russia and the subsequent struggle led by its co-leader, Leon Trotsky, against the Soviet Stalinist bureaucracy which usurped power from the working class, betrayed the revolutionary strivings of workers around the world in the name of the reactionary nationalist credo of socialism in one country, and ultimately, as Trotsky forewarned, restored capitalism. None of the burning issues facing the Indian masses, from the fight against the pandemic, social inequality, and the threat of war, to the eradication of caste oppression and the defeat of communal reaction, can be addressed outside the struggle against Indian and world capitalism and for the socialist reorganization of global socio-economic life. Therefore, in conclusion, I urge all listening today to take up the fight for socialism by placing yourself under the emancipatory banner of the Fourth International. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Keith Jones, for that extensive analysis. This moment of time, I want to read out the greetings from the ICFI supporters in India who have sent greetings for this meeting. The ICFI supporters group in India is pleased to extend warmest Trotskyist greetings to today's online meeting being held by the Socialist Equality Party, the Sri Lankan section of the ICFI, on the burning topic today in India and globally, the massive loss of human lives and mounting social catastrophe caused by the callous handling the pandemic by the Modi government in India and its counterparts across the world. They are not unavoidable but inflicted by capitalist ruling elites' criminal class policy of prioritizing profit over human life. There is a mounting anger among workers against this homicidal policy expressed through strikes and protests. There are several auto and auto parts plants that have been forced to shut down by the intervention of workers, including Maruti Suzuki, Toyota Corolla Motors, Hyundai, Renault Nissan, Royal Enfield, MRF, Yamaha, and Ford. Dozens of workers have died and nearly 1,000 infected by COVID-19 in these industries. The spontaneous upsurge of workers and that of 6-month-old struggles of farmers need a socialist strategy to fight on and to overthrow the present bankrupt capitalist system and the capitalist rule that protects it. The staggering level of social inequalities has been further intensified by the impact of disastrous handling of COVID-19 by the Indian ruling elite. Last January, India's 100 billionaires have seen their fortunes increase by rupees 12.98, almost 13 trillion rupees since March 2020, enough to give every one of the 138 million poorest Indian people a check for 94,045, almost 100,000 rupees each. It would take an unskilled worker 10,000 years to make what Mukesh Ambani made in an hour during the pandemic, and 3 years to make what he made in a second. At the January 3rd, 2020, WSW's Perspective article explained the rise to power of such criminal and even psychopathic personalities as Narendra Modi in India, Rodrigo Duterte in Philippines, Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi in Egypt, Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, Donald Trump in the United States, and Boris Johnson in the UK is symptomatic of a systemic crisis of the entire capitalist system. In 1947, reactionary communal partition of then British India into a Muslim Pakistan and Hindu-dominated India was engineered to divide and suppress the working class and prevent its independent political initiative. Then Indian Stalinists organized in the undivided Communist Party of India, and all sections of the Indian elite were complicit in the 1947 communal bloodbath, as they saw their common enemy not in imperialist colonialism but the working class, inspired by the 1917 Russian Revolution. The Modi government is whipping up Hindu communalism to divert and suppress the growing wave of class struggles. The Indian bourgeoisie's global strategic partnership with US imperialism, cemented under Congress rule, has been taken to its logical height by the Modi government and transformed India into a frontline state, the US imperialism in its war drive against China. The twin Stalinist parties, the CPI-M and CPI, have for decades propped up Indian capitalist rule, and now they are joined by Indian Maoist parties, chiefly the CPI-ML Liberation, under the guise of defending the so-called progressive Indian constitution and democracy. The ICFI supporters group in India appreciates and respects the immense political experience and dedication of the Sri Lankan section of the ICFI in the fight for Trotskyism against all hostile political forces. We are confident that under the political guidance of the SEP, we will go forward to establish an Indian section of the ICFI in the near future. Thank you. Arun Kumar on behalf of the Indian supporters of the ICFI. With that, I also would like to bring to your notice the Marxist Trotskyist literature that we have for your attention. This literature, which is important for your political awareness and understanding. When you are searching for English language literature, Marxist literature, Trotskyist literature, you can use the Merriam books, now established in Australia as well, closer to this region. So this, what is in your left side of this slide is that Merriam Books Australia, so that you can order and get it delivered into you. Can I have the slide again? Yeah. So the other side of the slide is for Tamil and Sinhala language books. So if you want Tamil books and Sinhala language books, please send us an email to given email address, or you can call this number so that we can organize the books that you want, which are available in our respective sites, the Tamil site and the Sinhala site. It is a, yeah. So with that, I would like to come back to the meeting. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Comrade V. Gnana. Gnana is the Assistant National Secretary of the Socialist Equality Party in France. After entering Trotsky's movement from the Tamil nationalist movement, which fought against the Sri Lankan government communal war in the 1980s, Comrade Gnana has been active for over 35 years in Trotskyist politics. Today he will speak in Tamil. He's speaking from Paris. So please welcome Comrade Gnana.
நன்றி தோழர் சமன். தோழர்களே, நண்பர்களே, இதற்கண் இந்த முக்கியத்துவம் வாய்ந்த சர்வதேச நிகழ்வுக்கு பிரெஞ்சு சோசலிச சமத்துவ கட்சியின் சகோதரத்துவ வாழ்த்துக்களை தெரிவிப்பதில் மகிழ்ச்சி அடைகிறேன். ஏற்கனவே எனக்கு முதல் பேசிய தோழர்கள் விளங்கப்படுத்தியது போல் கோவிட் தொற்று நோய் ஒரு உலக நிகழ்வாகும். உலகளவில் ஒருங்கிணைந்த விஞ்ஞான சுகாதார மூலோபாயத்தால் மட்டுமே இந்த நோயை தோற்கடிக்க முடியும். இது எல்லைகளையும் கடவுச்சீட்டுகளையும் புறக்கணித்து அனைத்து நாட்டு மக்களையும் பாதிக்கிறது. பாரிய மரணங்கள் தவிர்ப்பதற்கு சர்வதேச அளவில் தொழிலாளர் வர்க்கத்தை ஐக்கியப்படுத்தி அணிதிரட்ட வேண்டும் என்பதை கடந்த ஆண்டின் நிகழ்வுகள் மிகவும் தெளிவாக உறுதிப்படுத்தியுள்ளன. உலகெங்கிலும் இந்த தொற்று நோய்களின் போது முதலாளித்துவ ஆளும் உயரடுக்கினர் உழைக்கும் மக்களின் வாழ்க்கை தொடர்பாக தங்களின் அப்பட்டமான அலட்சியத்தை வெளிப்படுத்தியுள்ளனர். மருத்துவர்களும் விஞ்ஞானிகளும் கோரிய பொது சுகாதார நடவடிக்கைகளை எடுக்க அரசாங்கங்கள் மறுத்ததால் ஐரோப்பாவில் COVID-19 காரணமாக 1 மில்லியனுக்கும் மேற்பட்ட மக்கள் இறந்துள்ளனர். பிரெஞ்சு ஜனாதிபதி இமானுவேல் மாக்ரோன் மக்கள் வைரசுடன் வாழ பழகிக் கொள்ள வேண்டும் என்று அறிவித்தார். பிரிட்டிஷ் பிரதம மந்திரி போரிஸ் ஜான்சனின் முன்னாள் தலைமை ஆலோசகரான டொமினிக் கமிங்ஸ் சமீபத்திய அம்பலப்படுத்தல்கள் பிரிட்டனில் COVID-19 நோயால் 800,000 பேர் இறக்க விடுவதை பிரிட்டிஷ் அரசாங்கம் முன்னரே திட்டமிட்டுள்ளது என்பதை வெளிப்படுத்தியுள்ளது. இந்தியாவில் நடந்த கொடூரமான சோகங்கள் வெறும் இந்திய நிகழ்வுகள் அல்ல. தங்கள் உயிருக்கும் அதே அச்சுறுத்தல் உள்ளது என்பதை ஐரோப்பாவிலும் சர்வதேச அளவிலும் தொழிலாளர்கள் நன்கு அறிவார்கள். இந்தியாவில் COVID-19 இறந்த தங்கள் அன்புக்குரியவர்களின் உடல்களை தகனம் செய்ய நீண்ட வரிசையில் நிற்பதை அல்லது கங்கையில் சடலங்கள் மிதப்பதை அல்லது நாய்களால் உண்ணப்படுவதை வீடியோக்களில் கண்டபோது அவர்கள் அதிர்ச்சி அடைந்து போனார்கள். மேலும் இந்தியாவில் முதலில் கண்டறியப்பட்ட வைரஸ் மாறுபாடு இப்போது ஐரோப்பாவின் பெரும்பகுதி உட்பட உலகளவில் 53 பிராந்தியங்களில் உத்தியோகபூர்வமாக பதிவு செய்யப்பட்டுள்ளது. உலகெங்கிலும் உள்ள ஆழ உயரடுக்கினர் பொதுமக்களின் வரிப்பணத்தை சூறையாடும் அதே நேரத்தில் சமூக இடைவெளி பராமரிப்பு கொள்கைகளை நடைமுறைப்படுத்த பணமில்லை என்று கூறுகின்றனர். ஐரோப்பிய ஒன்றியம் வங்கிகளுக்கு பெரும் வணிகங்களுக்கும் பிணை எடுப்பதற்காக 2 டிரில்லியன் யூரோக்களை செலவழித்துள்ளது. அதே நேரத்தில் தொழிலாளர்கள் அத்தியாவசியமற்ற வேலைப்பணிகளில் இருக்க வேண்டும் என்றும் குழந்தைகள் பள்ளிக்கு செல்ல வேண்டும் என்றும் தொடர்ந்து வலியுறுத்தி வருகின்றனர். நரேந்திர மோடியின் கீழ் இந்திய ஆளும் வர்க்கமும் சமூக படுகொலைக்கான இதே கொள்கைகளைத்தான் திணிக்கிறது. வைரஸின் பரவலை தடுக்க அல்லது இந்தியாவின் அடிப்படை சுகாதார உள்கட்டமைப்பை மேம்படுத்த அல்லது சமூக இடைவெளி பராமரிப்பு கொள்கைகளுக்கு போதிய நிதி இல்லை என்றது கூறுகிறது. அதே நேரத்தில் ஒரு புதிய பாராளுமன்ற கட்டிடத்தையும் பிரதமருக்கான இல்லத்தையும் கட்ட 2.8 பில்லியன் அமெரிக்க டாலர்களையும் இராணுவ செலவினங்களுக்காக 71.1 பில்லியன் அமெரிக்க டாலர்களையும் ஒதுக்கியுள்ளது. உலக பொருளாதார வளங்களை பொறுத்தவரையில் கொரோனா வைரஸை தடுப்பதற்கான தொழில்நுட்ப, விஞ்ஞான மற்றும் தொழில்துறை கருவிகள் போதுமானதாக உள்ளன. முதலாளித்துவத்துக்கு எதிரான தொழிலாளர் வர்க்கத்தின் ஒரு நனவான ஐக்கியப்பட்ட சர்வதேச இயக்கம் மட்டுமே பெருஞ்செல்வந்தர்களுக்கான லாபத்துக்காக அன்றி இந்த வளங்களை கையகப்படுத்தி உழைக்கும் மக்களை காப்பாற்ற அவற்றை பயன்படுத்த முடியும். அத்தகைய ஒரு இயக்கம் உருவாவதை தடுக்க ஆளும் வர்க்கம் அவர்களை பிளவுபடுத்துவதற்கும் அத்தகைய தேசிய, மத, இன மற்றும் சாதி ரீதியான பிளவுகளுக்கு அப்பாற்பட்டு தொழிலாளர்களை ஐக்கியப்படுத்துவதற்கு ஒரு நனவான போராட்டம் அவசியப்படுகிறது. தொழிலாளர்களை ஐக்கியப்படுத்தும் இந்த போராட்டம் ஒவ்வொரு அடியெடுப்பிலும் 1947 இந்திய பிரிவினையிலிருந்து வெளிவந்த திவாலான தேசிய அரசமைப்பு முறையுடன் முரண்படுகிறது. இந்த பிரிவினையானது பிரித்தானிய ஏகாதிபத்தியத்துக்கு எதிரான இந்திய துணைக்கண்டத்தின் தொழிலாளர்கள் மற்றும் விவசாயிகளின் புரட்சிகர போராட்டத்தை கருச்சிலப்பு செய்தது. இந்தியா என்றும் பாகிஸ்தான் என்றும் இந்து என்றும் முஸ்லீம் என்றும் மற்றும் பல்வேறு சாதிகள் என்றும் தொழிலாளர் வர்க்கத்தை பிளவுபடுத்தி ஆட்சி செய்ததிலிருந்து உருவாகிய சமூக அவல நிலைமைகளை இத்தொற்று நோய் அம்பலப்படுத்தியுள்ளது. நகர்ப்புற இந்தியர்களில் கிட்டத்தட்ட 20% வீட்டில் தண்ணீர், சோப்பு வசதிகள் கூட இல்லை. இந்தியாவின் 1.3 பில்லியன் மக்களில் சுமார் 160 மில்லியன் மக்களுக்கு சுத்தமான நீர் கிடைப்பதில்லை. இது ரஷ்யாவின் முழு மக்கள் தொகையை விட அதிகமாகும். இந்தியா மட்டுமல்ல, தெற்காசியா முழுவதிலும் மருத்துவர்கள், செவிலியர்கள், மருத்துவமனைகள், படுக்கைகள், சுவாச கருவிகள் துறக்கம் தடுப்பூசிகள் வரை அனைத்துக்கும் பெரும் பற்றாக்குறை உள்ளது. இந்த நிலைமையில் மக்களுக்கு தொற்று நோயிலிருந்து பாதுகாத்துக் கொள்ள அடிக்கடி கைகளை கழுவுமாறு இலவச ஆலோசனைகளும் வழங்கப்படுகிறது. துண்டு துண்டாக பிரிக்கப்பட்ட இந்த நாடுகளின் அனுபவங்கள் ரஷ்ய புரட்சியின் இணைத்தலைவரான லியோன் ட்ரொட்ஸ்கியின் நிரந்தர புரட்சி முன்னோக்கின் சரியான தன்மையை உறுதிப்படுத்துகின்றன. இந்திய முதலாளித்துவத்தின் வர்க்கத்தன்மை குறித்து 80 ஆண்டுகளுக்கு முன்னரான அவரின் எச்சரிக்கை முற்றுமுழுதாக இன்றைய தலைவர்களுக்கும் பொருந்தும். தயவு செய்து அதை மேற்கோள் காட்ட என்னை அனுமதியுங்கள். ட்ரொட்ஸ்கி பின்வருமாறு குறிப்பிட்டார்: இந்திய முதலாளித்துவ வர்க்கம் ஒரு புரட்சிகர போராட்டத்தினை வழிநடத்த லாயக்கற்றது. அவர்கள் பிரித்தானிய முதலாளித்துவத்துடன் தம்மை மிகவும் நெருக்கமாக பிணைத்துள்ளதோடு அதன் தயவிலும் இருந்து வருகின்றனர். அவர்கள் தமது சொந்த சொத்துக்களை இழந்து விடுவோமோ என அஞ்சி நடுங்குகின்றனர். அவர்கள் சொந்த வெகுஜனங்களை கண்டு அஞ்சுகின்றனர். என்ன விலை கொடுத்தாவது பிரித்தானிய ஏகாதிபத்தியத்துடன் சமரசத்தை நாடுகின்றனர். மேலிருந்து சீர்திருத்தங்கள் கிடைக்கும் என்ற நம்பிக்கையை கொடுத்து இந்திய வெகுஜனங்களை தூங்க வைக்கின்றனர். காந்தி இந்த முதலாளித்துவ வர்க்கத்தின் போலி தலைவரும் மோசடி தீர்க்கதரிசியும் ஆவர். இந்த மாபெரும் மார்க்சிசவாதியின் வார்த்தைகளுக்கு தொற்று நோய் தொடர்பான இந்திய ஆளுந்தட்டின் பிரதிபலிப்பு ஒரு உறுதிப்படுத்தலாகும். தொழிலாளர்கள் இந்திய அரசியல் ஸ்தாபகத்தில் உள்ள மோடியின் போட்டியாளர்களிடம் முறையிடுவதன் மூலம் சமூக படுகொலை கொள்கையை நிறுத்த முடியாது. காங்கிரஸ் கட்சியும் ஸ்டாலினிச பிராந்தியவாத மற்றும் சாதிவாத கட்சிகளிடையே உள்ள அதன் கூட்டாளிகளும் தொழிற்சங்க அதிகாரத்துவமும் இதே மாதிரியான கொள்கையை தீவிரமாக ஆதரிக்கின்றன அல்லது சாத்தியமான எல்லா இடங்களிலும் தாமே செயல்படுத்துகின்றன. இதற்கு தெளிவான எடுத்துக்காட்டு திராவிட முன்னேற்ற கழகத்தின் தலைமையில் காங்கிரஸ் கட்சி ஸ்டாலினிஸ்டுகளுடன் அத்துடன் சாதிவாத கூட்டுகளுடன் தமிழ்நாட்டில் உருவாக்கப்பட்ட புதிய அரசாங்கமாகும். மோடிக்கும் அவரது கூட்டாளிகளுக்கும் எதிரான பரந்த எதிர்ப்பை பயன்படுத்தி கடந்த மாத தேர்தலில் அவர்கள் வெற்றி பெற்றனர். ஆயினும் கூட மோடி அரசாங்கத்தைப் போலவே திமுக தலைமையிலான கூட்டணியும் தொற்று நோய் காலத்தில் அதே சமூக படுகொலை கொள்கையைத்தான் நடைமுறைப்படுத்துகிறார்கள். அவர்கள் பேரளவுக்கு ஒரு பொது முடக்கத்தை அல்லது முழு ஊரடங்கை அறிவித்துவிட்டு ஏதுமற்ற நாள் கூலி ஏழை தொழிலாளர்களை பட்டினி கிடக்க விட்டுள்ளார்கள். அரிசி அட்டை இல்லாத தொழிலாளர்களுக்கு எதுவும் கிடைப்பதில்லை. அதே நேரம் லட்சக்கணக்கான தொழிலாளர்களை நிறுவனங்களின் வண்டிகளில் ஏற்றி வந்து அத்தியாவசியமற்ற உற்பத்தி தொழிற்சாலைகளை வேலைக்கு அனுமதிக்கிறார்கள். அனைவருக்கும் தெரியும், இது எண்ணற்ற ஆயிரக்கணக்கானோர் இறப்பதை உறுதி செய்ய போறது. 4ஆம் அகிலத்தின் அனைத்துலக குழுவும் அதன் பிரிவுகளும் எல்லாவற்றுக்கும் மேலாக இலங்கையில் உள்ள சோசலிச சமத்துவ கட்சியும் இந்திய தொழிலாளர் வர்க்கத்தினை உலக சோசலிச புரட்சி முன்னோக்கை நோக்கி அணிதிரட்டுவதற்காக போராடுகின்றன. இலங்கையில் சோசலிச சமத்துவ கட்சி ட்ரொட்ஸ்கிசத்தினதும் சோசலிசத்துக்குமான போராட்டத்தில் இனம், மதம், மொழி மற்றும் சாதி கடந்து தொழிலாளரை ஐக்கியப்படுத்தும் போராட்டத்தில் ஒரு நீண்ட வரலாற்றை கொண்டது. இலங்கையில் இருந்த லங்கா சமசமாஜ கட்சியின் சிறந்த மரபுகளை அது தொடர்கிறது. பிரித்தானிய காலனித்துவ ஆட்சிக்கு எதிரான பாரிய போராட்டங்களின் மத்தியில் இந்திய தொழிலாளர் வர்க்கத்தை நோக்கி லியோன் ட்ரொட்ஸ்கி விடுத்த அழைப்பை லங்கா சமசமாஜ கட்சி தீவிரமாக எடுத்துக்கொண்டது. அவர்கள் ஸ்டாலினிஸ்டுகளை தங்கள் கட்சியிலிருந்து வெளியேற்றினர். அடுத்து தீவின் புரட்சிகர சோசலிச இயக்கமானது இந்தியா முழுவதுமான ஒரு புரட்சிகர இயக்கத்தின் ஒருங்கிணைந்த பாகமாக மட்டுமே உருவாக முடியும் என்று அவர்கள் அறிவித்தனர். அதற்காக அவர்கள் இலங்கையிலிருந்து வெளியேறி இந்தியாவில் போல்ஷிவிக் லெனினிஸ்ட் கட்சியை கட்ட போராடினார்கள். பிரித்தானிய ஏகாதிபத்தியவாதிகளுடன் சேர்ந்து கொண்ட ஸ்டாலினிஸ்டுகளுக்கு எதிராக போல்ஷிவிக் லெனினிஸ்ட் கட்சி மட்டுமே ஏகாதிபத்திய எதிர்ப்பு போராட்டத்துக்கு தலைமை வழங்கியது. லங்கா சமசமாஜ கட்சி ட்ரொட்ஸ்கிசத்துக்கு செய்த பெரும் காட்டி கொடுப்பை எதிர்த்தவர்களால் சோசலிச சமத்துவ கட்சி உருவாக்கப்பட்டது. அது சிங்கள பேரினவாதத்துக்கு சரணடைந்து 1964 ஸ்ரீமாவோ பண்டாரநாயக்காவின் முதலாளித்துவ அரசாங்கத்துக்குள் நுழைந்தது. இது இலங்கை அரசால் பின்னர் நிறைவேற்றப்பட்ட சிங்கள இனவரி அரசியலமைப்பை உருவாக்குவதில் முக்கிய பங்கு வகித்ததோடு இதன் மூலம் தொழிலாளர் வர்க்கத்தை இன ரீதியாக பிரிக்கும் தமிழ் தேசியவாதிகளின் பிற்போக்கு முயற்சிகளுக்கு ஆதரவளித்தது. தமிழ் மக்கள் மற்றும் தமிழீழ விடுதலை புலிகளுக்கு எதிராக இலங்கை அரசு நடத்திய 26 ஆண்டு கால இனவாத போரை எந்தவித சமரசத்துக்கும் இடமின்றி எதிர்த்த ஒரே ஒரு கட்சி சோசலிச சமத்துவ கட்சி மட்டுமே. அதேவேளை தமிழ் தேசியவாதத்துக்கு எதிராக அது ஒரு சிறிய சலுகைகளும் வழங்கப்படவில்லை. மாறாக முழு முதலாளித்துவ அமைப்பு முறைக்கும் எதிராக தமிழ் மக்களை அவர்களின் சிங்கள முஸ்லிம் சகோதர சகோதரிகளுடன் ஐக்கியப்படுத்துவதற்கான போராட்டத்தில் அது தனது ஆரம்பம் முதல் இறுதி வரை போராடியது. இன்று நாம் பல்லாயிரக்கணக்கான தமிழ் பொதுமக்கள் உட்பட தமிழீழ விடுதலை புலி போராளிகள் முள்ளிவாய்க்கால் படுகொலை செய்யப்பட்ட 12வது நிறைவுக்கு பின்னர் கூடியிருக்கிறோம். 20ஆம் நூற்றாண்டின் மிகப்பெரிய போர் குற்றங்களில் ஒன்றான இந்த படுகொலைக்கு பிரதமர் மன்மோகன் சிங்கின் இந்திய காங்கிரஸ் கட்சி அரசாங்கத்தின் மறைமுக ஆதரவு இருந்துள்ளது. வெளியான விக்கிலீக்ஸ் தகவல்கள் திட்டமிட்டபடி பாரிய மக்கள் படுகொலைகளை இந்திய அரசியல் ஸ்தாபகம் எதிர்க்காது என இந்திய அதிகாரிகள் அமெரிக்க ராஜதந்திரிகளுக்கு உறுதியளித்ததை காட்டுகின்றன. இன்று COVID-19 தொற்று நோயின் உலக பேரழிவு முன்னொருபோதும் இல்லாத அவசியத்துடன் தொழிலாளர் வர்க்கத்தின் சர்வதேச ஐக்கியத்தை எழுப்புகிறது. இதில் இந்தியாவிலும் இலங்கையிலும் இந்திய கண்டத்திலும் உள்ள அனைத்து வெவ்வேறு இனங்களைச் சேர்ந்த தொழிலாளர்களை ஒன்றிணைக்கும் போராட்டம் முக்கிய பங்கு வகிக்கும். 4ஆம் அகிலத்தின் அனைத்துலக குழுவின் ஒரு பகுதியாக இந்தியாவில் இந்த ட்ரொட்ஸ்கிச இயக்கத்தை கட்டியெழுப்புவதற்கான போராட்டம் அதன் மத்தியில் இருக்கும். நன்றி தோழர்களே.
Thank you, Jana. Now we are coming into the final speech of this meeting. So to make the concluding remarks, I would like to invite Comrade Vijay Dias. Vijay Dias is a member of the WSWS International Editorial Board and General Secretary, long-standing General Secretary of Socialist Equality Party Sri Lanka. Today he's speaking from Colombo. Please welcome Comrade Vijay Dias.
Comrades, this public meeting marks a new high stage in the struggle of the International Committee of the Fourth International and its Sri Lankan section, the Socialist Equality Party, to build the Indian section of the ICFI. The participation of the national secretaries of the HCPs in USA, Comrade Joe Kicho, and in Canada, Comrade Keith Jones, and also the Assistant National Secretary of the HCPE France, Comrade Bignana, on this platform of speakers is a powerful expression of the importance and urgency given to this task by the ICFI. The founder of the Fourth International, Leon Trotsky, in writing an open letter addressed to the Indian workers on the eve of the catastrophic Second World War in July 1939, ended it with the following words: complete independence from the bourgeoisie is indispensable to the proletariat. Above all, in order to exert influence on the peasantry, the predominant mass of Indian population. Only the proletariat is capable of advancing a bold, revolutionary, agrarian program of rousing and rallying tens of millions of peasants and leading them in struggle against the native oppressors and imperialism. We continue this struggle advocated by Trotsky on the basis of the theory of permanent revolution to found the Marxist Revolutionary Party, to educate and mobilize the working people and youth to fight against the false promises of Indian bourgeoisie and the naked treachery of Stalinist communist parties and their pseudo-left hangers on. As the previous speakers explained, today the world humanity, including us who live in South Asia, is confronted with the biggest terrible menace since the Second World War. In India, the responsibility for this catastrophic pandemic situation lies squarely with the bourgeois government of Narendra Modi, propped up by the treacherous Stalinist of the CPI, CPIM, and several other petty bourgeois fake left groups and trade unions. After the World War II, as part of the reactionary world settlement between global powers under the hegemony of US imperialism and the Moscow Stalinist bureaucracy, a deal was worked out for fake independence for British colonies in South Asia. Under this scheme, India was subjected to a bloody, irrational partition on Hindu and Muslim religious lines as India and Pakistan. In Sri Lanka, then Ceylon, brutal parliamentary acts were passed to deport over 1 million immigrant Tamil workers. Revisionists of Pablo Mandel variety that developed within the Fourth International shamelessly adapted to the reactionary post-war settlement and dissolved the Trotskyist revolutionary parties into Stalinist and bourgeois nationalist parties. That is how the Indian section of the Fourth International, the Bolshevik Leninist Party, of undivided India, founded in 1942 with its sections in Sri Lanka and Myanmar, then Burma, was liquidated. ICFI was founded in 1953 to fight and eradicate Pabloism from the Fourth International and rescue its revolutionary internationalist program. To make a long story short, after a long drawn-out struggle, ICFI was able to bring to a successful conclusion of the struggle against revisionism in 1985-86. The book-length record of this struggle and its important lessons in the region is presented in the document International and Historical Foundations of SCP Sri Lanka, now available in the internet. The attempts made by the SCP Sri Lanka to build a revolutionary party in India were enormously strengthened by the founding of the World Socialist website in 1998. Through it, ICFI's struggle to build the World Party of Socialist Revolution was brought to the instant notice of the working people and youth in every continent. Historical necessity and the validity of the struggle to bring to the working class the Trotskyist perspective of world socialism is revealed today more than ever before. At the same time, the situation has unraveled. The treacherous role played by all those parties and groups which opposed that struggle under various banners of People's Front to defend barbaric capitalism and rule of the elite classes. This is most explicit in India more than any other country of the world. Previous speakers explained with genuine statistics in hand what a tragic situation is brought upon the working people and oppressed poor by the capitalist rule on a world scale and in India in particular. This situation will exacerbate with the disaster waiting to happen due to the escalation of the war tensions in the region by US imperialism, which consciously work to make India a cat's-paw in the aggression against China. Despite all the chauvinist boastings of every bourgeois party, Congress party included, have displayed their complete subservience to the strongest imperialist military power. Indian bourgeoisie, as the main policeman for the US imperialism in the region, is working hard to bring the whole South Asia into the maelstrom of a nuclear war. The resistance of the working people is developing in this region as well around the world against the ruling classes, which are responsible for the increasing devastation due to the pandemic and the intensification of the war tension. We have been 2 general strikes in India last year and tens of thousands of farmers involved in a protest for over 6 months. As Comrade Joe explained in his remarks, how that the year we spent has not passed in vain and had profoundly radicalized the impact in the consciousness of the masses of workers and youth throughout the world. So he said that for workers throughout the world, critical question of program and perspective are raised. These are the questions of the international workers movement that are also addressed by the ICFI and the WSWH World Socialist website every day. It is urgently necessary to develop a chain of rank and file action committees independent of trade unions that stands as a barrier and betray every militant initiative of the workers in every country. Rank and file committees must be coordinated on a world scale in line with the call issued by the ICFI for an International Workers' Alliance of Rank and File Committees. This is to facilitate global struggle for a socialist solution to the global pandemic and world war. The decisive task for the realization of this program is the building of the ICFI sections in every country, including India. It is the way to realize the program for a federation of socialist states in South Asia. We invite all listeners today to join this struggle initiated by the Sri Lankan section of the ICFI in this region. Thank you, comrade. Unmute, Taman.
Sorry. Yeah, I would like to thank Comrade Vijay. And as Comrade Vijay emphasized, the decisive task for the realization of this program is the building of the ICFI sections in every country, including India. It is the way to realize the program for a federation of socialist states of South Asia. So before concluding the meeting, I would like to request again from the listeners, especially there's a considerable section of listeners from India. Out of more than 160 listeners of today's meeting. So I urge you to make a decision today to join with us, or correspond with us to build the Socialist Equality Party in India as a section of the International Committee of the Fourth International. Please contact us to discuss any clarifications you have in this regard. You can see on the screen our contact information so that we can build up connections. We can build up connections, and also we can correspond, and we can go forward with that task. With that, I would like to thank you very much for your participation. It seems almost everybody was here from the beginning of the meeting until the end of the meeting, and it shows the interest in the participation on this task. So we look forward to hear from everybody who are participating in here. We anticipate to hear from you soon regarding this task. With that, I would like to wish you a good night, and we'll meet again.